To the chair, you may begin when ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Thompson, and I am the chair of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. The committee secretary has, in fact, confirmed that we have quorum. So I would like to call meeting number 3 of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee to order and welcome everyone, and a special welcome to Toronto's and probably Canada's and the world's finest and wonderful mayor, Mayor John Tory. Mayor is with us this morning, and I will introduce him a little bit later on, but I'm excited that he's with us this morning. This morning's meeting is being held using WebEx technology with members and staff connecting by video conferencing or, in fact, calling in. Because we are, in fact, meeting remotely, we ask for your patience with any delay and technical issues. Members of the public can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. And members, we've had great challenges this week with respect to the technology. So again, I'm just going to implore you and say to you, we ask for your patience, and I'm hoping that today will be an exception from the week of technology challenges that I know I've had in some of the meetings I've had this week. I would like to remind all staff and invited participants to keep your mics muted and your video turned off unless you need to address the committee. This will make it easier for me as chair and for those watching on YouTube to see the members as we debate and vote on agenda items. Members, please keep your mics muted unless you wish to question staff or, in fact, speak on an item. If members wish to ask questions of staff or to speak, please make sure that your video is turned on and raise your hands or unmute your mic and indicate your intention to speak. And I will, in fact, create a speakers list. Because I'm working with a very small screen, I'm not able to see everyone on my screen at the same time. So I do ask and invite you to really help us with respect to indicating your interest to speak and or to ask a question. Want to remind you that when voting on an item, I would ask you again to, just to make sure you turn on your camera and raise your hands to indicate your intention and so on. This will help us to be able to record those who are voting, obviously, in favor or opposed to a specific that we're dealing with. Members, I also want to remind you that although we are participating remotely with respect to this meeting, we must all submit any motions that we wish to move on items in writing. The clerk staff are available at Quebec at toronto.ca to help with the motions that you wish to move. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee acknowledges the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. I'd also like to do the ancestral acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generation past, and those of us who came involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. Members, are there any declaration of interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interests Act? If you have a declaration of interest, please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. When declaring an interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, members are required to file a written declaration with the clerk. The clerk's staff can provide you with the forms, which you should complete and submit before the end of the meeting each time you declare an interest in an item. If you have an interest in any of the items that are in front of us today, please let me know. I will just take a moment to take a look at the screen. I don't see any hands moving. Okay, I assume then that have no interest. All right. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes from the committee's meeting on July 27? I'd like to ask maybe Maya, would you move that item, please?
Sorry, I'm not 100% sure what you mean.
Just move the item.
Okay, I moved the item.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much, Maya. All right, so I'm just going to move right along. Members, we have 6 items that are actually on the agenda. I'll just do a quick run through of the items. The first of the 6 item is CR 3.1. And we have extended an invitation which has been accepted by the mayor, and I've acknowledged him briefly, that Mayor Tory will be addressing the committee, and members will have the opportunity to ask the mayor questions and to make comments. The next item is CR 3.2, Digital Infrastructure Plan, Equity, Bias, and Discrimination Considerations. The next one is CR 3.3, Development of a Cultural District Plan for the City of Toronto. And then the next item is CR 3.4, Recognition, Review, and Renaming of Dundas Street Project Update. The next item is CR 3.5, Community Safety Initiatives. And then finally, the CR 3.6, and that is the Work Plan Priority. As I indicated, Toronto's favorite mayor and the country's favorite mayor, and I think the world's favorite mayor, actually. I say this, and I hadn't discussed with Mayor Tory, but I was speaking to a friend of mine from Los Angeles a couple of days ago, and he was talking about our mayor in such amazing term. I was quite proud, obviously, that the mayor is our mayor, and he is recognized globally. And so I'm really delighted to welcome Mayor Tory to address the members of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. The mayor has done a remarkably amazing job. Obviously, this is his second term, but his second term has been obviously tested with respect to his leadership as a result of the pandemic and so on. And I think that it goes without saying that the world has, in fact, watched Toronto, and I'm really serious about this, in terms of how we've performed and how we've worked through the pandemic and addressing the issues in terms of reaching all corners of the city to ensure that the residents of this city are able to get the needed things that they need to, not simply to survive, but to thrive, particularly through this pandemic. And certainly beyond. The mayor had, well before this pandemic, started down the road of ensuring that all of our citizens and all Torontonians were accounted for, and their interests is being considered, and looking from City Hall out, that strong indications and strong interest to hear from members of the community and to look at those who have indicated that they're not feeling fully sanctioned and or part of the vibrancy, part of the development, and part of the economic, development and improvement and mobility that's taking place in the city. And the mayor has reached out, and particularly into the Black community, and has been a strong advocate even before he was elected mayor of the city of Toronto for the community and so on. And he has been a strong advocate for developing what we are able to, as a committee, work on in terms of addressing issues with respect to the Black community, the advancement, education, and housing, and all the issues that are facing this community. And yes, other communities are facing this as well, but we've zeroed in on the Black community, and the mayor's leadership has been extremely stellar and effective in this area. And so we've invited the mayor to join us this morning. He has graciously accepted, and he's here with us this morning. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mayor John Tory to address members of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Committee. Mayor, good morning and welcome to the committee.
Well, Mr. Chair, Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, and members of the committee, thank you for having me this morning, and thank you for that kind introduction. I should point out that there is no question but that the world's most popular mayor remains Hazel McCallion long after she's left office. But I don't strive. If you don't even strive to be popular in these jobs, quite frankly. What you strive to be is respected as having tried to do the right thing, and that's what I sort of focus on every day. But having said that, I appreciate your words of introduction. I should say a couple of things at the outset. First of all, thank you to the members of the committee for agreeing to serve. It's the first time I've had a chance to speak with you in this more formal context of an official meeting. Met many of you before in different places. But I very much appreciate the fact that a panel of this distinction has stepped forward to advise us. And I'll remark later on the fact this is a formal part of the legislative process, as you can tell from the fact that the deputy mayor has to actually ask people to move and second things, and you have to declare any interest you have under the Conflict of Interest Act. And I think that's something that, is to be taken note of, that this is a formal part of the legislative process now. And that is something that is a first, to our knowledge, in North America, in cities, to have something like this that isn't just, one more of many important committees we have, but one that has been built right into the legislative process. And I want to thank Michael Thompson, Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson, for serving as chair. Michael Thompson has just been a tower of strength for me as mayor and for the city and its administration. And that's not just in respect of his role as chair of the Economic Development and Culture Committee, which is one of the most important committees, and there are only a handful of committees at the city, but also on some of these issues, which I believe are fundamental to our success going forward. I just believe that the degree to which we can make ourselves the most inclusive city in the world, and that doesn't mean we'll ever achieve perfection, but that we can achieve a standard that's higher than many other places, is going to be hugely important to our success going forward. Because to the extent people are included, first of all, they'll feel respected, and as they should, everybody. But secondly, a city that's not inclusive will not be as successful when you are as diverse as we are. I mean, that's just a fact. That's more related to what I call the business case as opposed to the moral case. But if you're leaving a large portion of people out in different communities that don't have access to economic opportunity or have other things that would be associated with a proper quality of life, then you are going to weaken the city, and you're going to lead to a lot of unfortunate consequences that are social and economic, and some of which we're being confronted by today. I should just say to you that on many issues, and I'll give you one example because it was mentioned and it's on the agenda today, on Dundas Street, when, it's a complex issue. I knew what the right thing to do was, but you had to sort of know how to do it in a way that was, that could carry with it the confidence of the public and that could allow us to proceed to do something that was right in 2021. And I can tell you who I called. I mean, the minute we got back the report from the public service was I called the deputy mayor and just said, look, help me with this and talk to me about this. And there was no doubt in my mind as to sort of what the right thing was to do, both before, but particularly after my conversation with him. And, that's a work in progress too, and you're going to help us with that. But it's just an example of how he helps me. It is important to note that this is the first municipality to establish a committee of this kind that is a formal part of the legislative process, and it follows on our being the first city in North America to establish a formal, inside City Hall confronting anti-Black racism unit as part of the public service in the government. And I think it's going to help us to get to the next level. Not only would I say it's going to help us, I don't think we can get to the next level without the help. It's fine for us. Look at me. I mean, I'm a privileged white man of a certain age, and that doesn't mean I bring bad things to the job. It just means I bring what I bring. And I've learned a lot in having this job, but at the same time, I think I need advice on some of these issues, as we all do. And I think that if we're going to advance our goals and get the expert advice we need on some of these critical city issues that I've alluded to earlier, and that I'll make allusion to in just a moment, then we very much need your help. And I hope that you won't feel, I'm sure you won't, given the nature of the people involved, hesitant to offer that advice in a way that I hope is constructive, but at the same time honest in terms of what we have done well, what we haven't done well. I'll tell you just two or three things that I think, a couple of which we've done well and a couple of which not so much. I would look at areas where we've been less active, even since the establishment of the Anti-Black Racism Action Plan, as being employment, where I think it's hugely critical. I mean, employment, I think helps to solve a lot of problems for people in terms of their self-respect, their dignity, but also their economic well-being, their ability to provide for their families, their ability to have proper housing, and so on. And a lot of people, that in and of itself, a secure job and access to opportunity is going to do the trick, as it were, and take away a number of the other things that would otherwise confront them. And I don't think we've done as well at looking at those kind of very sensitive, unique things we can do, initiatives we can undertake as a city to help with that. I also add procurement to that list. The deputy mayor will remember a meeting not too long ago where I was very much involved in the establishment of a social procurement policy for the city so that we could give diverse-led enterprises a fair chance at bidding on even our own considerable purchases. And when I asked for a progress report a couple of years later, they said, well, we hadn't really been able to find these firms and we haven't really been able to have too many to sell things to us. And I don't accept that answer, because they're out there. You know that, and you could probably direct us to a third of them, just this group alone. And so I think we have to do better at that, because that, again, ties into the whole notion of some degree of economic security, which is going to help a lot of people to get themselves established. An area of progress where I think we are making progress, less than we're given credit for, is actually policing. I think spurred on by some of the demonstrations and other kinds of things that happened a couple of years ago, we are embarked on an incredible program of change that I think is going to help to restore trust in policing, and that is bringing about fundamental change in the way safety and dealing with people in crisis is delivered in the city. And I think we're making more progress than people think, and I'm happy with that. I'm never content that we're doing enough, but I'm content that we're trying hard to do a lot. And then an area where I think we've learned a lot and where I think we did well was during the pandemic. We learned there, and this is how you can help us translate that learning into other areas. We learned about the need to deliver things in a sort of culturally, racially sensitive manner. And how did we do that? Well, we went out and got advice from the community itself. So if you look at how we confronted some of the issues that exist with respect to vaccinations, say in the Black communities, we got advice from some of the leading Black scientists and other people in the community as to how we could deal with that reality and try to address it in a way that was going to be successful for the city in the end. Similarly with mental health, we didn't just deliver a service at 211 that sort of said, well, anybody with mental health issues can call there and get transferred to a person right away, which was, I think, hugely helpful to a lot of people. And we had hundreds of thousands of calls there. But we put people in place from the Black communities, for example, so that any mental health issues could be specifically addressed by people who were knowledgeable about the overall context within which those often happen. And so I would say those are things that we've taken some lesson from. And I would just say to you that we need help in a lot of areas, and the agenda today is going to represent a good start with ongoing agendas to come. So I will just thank you again for taking on what I believe to be a very important responsibility, both in the context of the importance of the issue and our success that we have to have in confronting anti-Black racism, but also within the context of proving that this kind of a legislative mechanism that we put into the formal structure can work. That it can work and can be effective, and that you can, in fact, be, to the extent any of you can be. I know how hard it is trying to represent the views of hundreds of thousands of people, but I think you can be the sort of voices and eyes and ears of the Black communities in the city, and that's going to be very important. And I think if you add it together with the CABR unit itself inside the city government, ably led by Anthony and his team, the commitment that the Toronto Public Service and the Council have to having meaningful action undertaken, that we can produce a more equitable, more inclusive city, which is the idea here. I'll just finish on this note. When I first ran for mayor in 2003, and Michael made note of the fact that I'd had a long-standing involvement and interest in and commitment to the Black communities in Toronto before I ever ran for office. But the first time I ran for office was in 2003 when I ran for mayor, and I lost in that election. I finished a close second, but there are no second prizes in this area. But I remember going to a forum, one of many that probably a lot of you have been to, on Black community issues up in the northwest part of the city. And I remember people standing up almost one after another, and this is in 2003, 18 years ago, and saying, well, we've been to a lot of these meetings before, and we will stand up and say what we have to say about some of the issues, but we're kind of tired of these meetings because we don't see much progress from one election to the next when we have the meetings. I want to be able to emerge because I think it's the right thing for the city and it's the right thing for a mayor to do, with the help of Deputy Mayor Thompson and yourselves, able to say, and hopefully people able to say, look, there's still a lot to do and there's still a lot he hasn't done, but nonetheless, this mayor and this administration, this council has actually got some things they can say have been achieved on their watch in terms of confronting anti-Black racism and actually producing better opportunity and inclusiveness and equity for the people in our Black communities, which contribute so much and who are so numerous as a part of the population. So I thank you again for your attention, and I'm looking forward to being part of your discussions briefly this morning, and then leaving you to do what you have to do, and looking forward to seeing the recommendations that come from your work. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory. And as the mayor has indicated, members, that this is a very important committee and very important work that's being done by you, and it helps to form the decision making that the mayor and council will arrive at to address issues around employment. The mayor talked a little bit about procurement, and there's a lot of work. And I just say that even before the mayor again was elected, there was conversation with him about this, and he supported that. And of course, when he became the mayor, basically he stepped up and did what needed to be done. And that's ongoing work. The mayor's talked about the work in terms of policing that's being done. I'm proud that I've worked with the mayor and others to address some of the issues and or offer suggestions in terms of how to ensure that the community's interests in policing and employment and jobs and so on are addressed. Mental health issue the mayor has spoken about. I'm also very proud of the work that's been done with the mayor and his leadership around the work that the Black Scientific Group has done to help and bring obviously information to the Black community with respect to the vaccines and regarding hesitancy and so on. And the mayor has addressed some of the issues, some of the achievement and so on. So I want to thank the mayor for that. Just before I ask Anthony Morgan just to do a quick overview on the KBRAC and its priorities and so on, I wondered whether or not members had any questions and or comments on the mayor's address and remarks. And as I said, I can't see everyone at the same time, but if anyone has any comments and wishes to speak, Dr. Daniels, do you have, I see your mic's open, so I wonder if you can go ahead, please.
Thank you and good morning. Mayor Tory, I'm wondering to what extent there has been consideration in terms of the funding models to support Black students in post-secondary contexts. And the reason I ask that question is because you mentioned the importance of employment opportunities, but those employment opportunities are also connected to academic development. And when we look at most of the funding that's in place, there's very little that really speaks to how do we effectively support Black students who are in the college and university environments, when technically they are the students or the members of the public that we can most quickly move into employment spaces, that we can most quickly get a return on our investments. So if we invested in youth programs, for example, we're still looking at 10 to 12 years potentially before there can be a return on that investment. However, if we supported the students who are currently in colleges and universities, we're looking at a potentially a 2-year return on that investment. So I'm wondering if you can sort of speak to that.
Well, thank you. It's an excellent question. And I think I'll say two things in reply. One, without dodging that question of people who are in college or about to be in college or university, I will say there are many. I mean, I've heard this, for example, I had a meeting that I've talked about often. The deputy mayors, I'm sure, heard me speak about meetings I had with some Somali moms up in the northwest end of the city. And they said, our kids stayed in school because you told us that we should tell them to stay in school, and we did. they got through college and went to college and got educated, but they still don't seem to end up having access to the jobs that are exploding in their quantity in Toronto in, say, the technology industries. And there's a disconnection there between those young people and those jobs. And I would say that's probably true of younger people from the Black communities who have graduated already from college. So that's a sort of a separate issue from what you described. With respect to the issue you did specifically ask about, I will be very honest in saying to you, the city government is in no position to start offering financial assistance to students, for example. It's just not something that the finances of city government are set up to do. But I believe that what Kathleen Wynne did when she was premier, and I've said this publicly, so it's not anything that will surprise Premier Ford to hear me say it, that when they had the system set up that basically allowed for free, in other words, grants paid for the cost of education of groups who were from disadvantaged circumstances on an income basis, relatively speaking, that would have assisted a lot of kids who are from the Black communities who are coming from marginalized circumstances to get into college and to have more financial assistance. The current government changed all of that and reversed a lot of that. I think that was wrong because I think you're right. And education is the best guarantee you're going to get of a good job, although not a guarantee. And so I would just say if part of the work of this committee produces something that can allow us, I hope in a constructive manner, to go back to the province and say, look, as part of your student aid initiatives, you should maybe take a second look at having something that amounts to a free meaning it's not loans, it's grants to people from lower income circumstances. I will tell you that will have my full support because I believe we were on the right track. Education is the greatest equalizer among many that we can employ. So I would just say to you, though, I can't tell you that the city government, even if you urged us to do so, could afford to take that on. We're not set up to fund social programs through property taxes. It's as simple as that. And that's all we really have in the way of ability to raise money.
Thank you.
Very much for that, Dr. Daniel. I'm just looking to see whether or not there's any further questions. All right, I see no further questions or comments on the mayor's remark. Mayor, I'd like to ask you just to hang around a little bit longer with us. I'd like to now ask Anthony Morgan, who is the manager for the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, to do an overview and also to maybe just highlight the priorities well for your group, Anthony, and this committee. So over to you, sir. We can hear you, Anthony. Is it just me, or can others hear him? Can't hear you.
To Anthony, this is the host. You appear unmuted, so we should be able to hear you. Have you unplugged or replugged a headset since we did the mic check with you earlier? You can also reply in WebEx chat if able. Anthony, it also looks like you're connected by phone as well. Have you called into the meeting? Can you try unmuting on that device? Anthony, it looks like you're indicating that we move forward. Am I understanding that correctly? To the chair, I'll attempt to troubleshoot with Anthony.
Is it possible for Anthony to use his phone to actually call in?
Yes.
Perhaps you can do that, Anthony. Members, as I've indicated, we've had a tough week with respect to technology, but technology has also been very helpful to us. So, and I urged earlier on to have patience, and I realize your patience is being tested, but we'll get Anthony on. Just give us a moment, please. So, members, we have the mayor and we have him sort of captive at the moment while we wait for the technology to come on stream. I mean, this is your opportunity to talk to the mayor of Toronto. How often you get this opportunity? So please, let's utilize the time. The mayor's here. Members, do you have any questions or any comments for the mayor? Any ideas for the mayor? And Ms. Phillips, go ahead, please. Let's utilize this time in a wise way. Thank you. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Good morning, Mayor Tory. I'm wondering, what are your long-term plans, as long-term as can be, but in terms of addressing anti-Black racism beyond this advisory committee and the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit? I know that this is part of the process, but do you have an overall vision of what that might look like for the city of Toronto? What's your kind of overall vision?
I think what we're going to hear from Anthony when we can get him hooked up, and thank you, Ms. Phillips, for the question, is exactly where we stand on that. And I indicated a couple of areas. If you look at the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan, we not only created the unit, but there was an action plan that went with it. It very much came from the community. I mean, we had, I think, some 500 or 600 people that participated, and I went to 5 of 45 or 44 public consultative meetings, and the ones that I went to were very well attended by well, I'll call them average people who came to talk about the things that needed to be done. And the action plan that arose out of that process had a number of areas in it, and one of the ones that, for example, I said I thought we were falling short on was employment. And there are other areas in there that deal with education and deal with what I'll call anti-Black racism on the street. I think we've been quite active in that as well through the Toronto for All campaign and a number of other initiatives that we're undertaking as a city. And so I would say to you that I think the worst thing that can happen is to take a plan that was put together like that as a result of very careful consultation not that long ago, and then sort of say, well, we better come up with a better plan now. You can always modify it, but I think if you go back to that plan, and this is what Anthony's scheduled to do in a moment or two when he calls back in, is to sort of tell you a bit of a progress report on where we think we stand. But what's more important than where we think we stand, and I've admitted a couple of areas of weakness, and I've admitted one where I think we're making progress on, or said one, which is policing. But we need to hear from you about that and say, well, you're wrong. You're not making as much progress as you think in this area over here, and then on the other one, you've left that isn't in the report that was written a couple of years ago, so we need to add it. And so, but I would just say to you that there is an action plan, so we don't need to, look ahead and say, well, what are we going to do next year? It's there. There's a work plan that's presented each year that comes out of that report as to things we want to do under the headings in it. And I can't remember all of them in my head, but employment and policing or community safety are both two of the headings. So I would say we have the plan. And the question is, how can we implement it as quickly as possible? And is the plan still as relevant as it was when it was written? And that's the kind of thing that we need your advice on. And Anthony's presentation was meant to stimulate that.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Phillips. And I think we are going to
You had
now
her hand
try
up there,
to see
though,
if we.
Michael. Just so.
Oh, sorry.
Complete that. Yeah.
I missed that. Go ahead, Ms. Phillips.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I wasn't questioning the plan, or I was not speaking specifically to the consequences of anti-Black racism, which are things like underemployment. I was speaking specifically to racism and the act of racism and the act of anti-Black racism itself, as opposed to addressing the consequences, which are very much in the plan.
Well, I will tell you, and I could just briefly, because I think Michael, Deputy Mayor, is ready to move on. I will say to you that in every one of these examinations we've been undertaking with regard to Islamophobia, with regard to anti-Asian racism and anti-Black racism, public education, if you want to call it that, and I know sometimes people find those phrases to be frustrating because what do they mean? I will just tell you from my own experience as mayor, when I took not one but two anti-Black racism training courses, the one offered by the city, which we're offering to all of our employees as a mandatory thing, and the second one being the one offered to police, I learned a huge amount. I'm 67 years old. I've been in every kind of job you could imagine. I have been very actively involved in these issues, as you know. I learned a lot from those educational courses that took me a couple of hours each. And so I think if that's true, which it is, then I would just tell you that that kind of public education, which we somehow have to sort of extend out to 3 million people, let alone the thousands that work at City Hall or the thousands that work for the police service, is going to be, as it always is, key. You know, there were things I learned about. I shouldn't go on, Michael. I apologize, Deputy Mayor. But there was one in the police training thing that talked about the look. And it's just the look on people's faces when they're sometimes confronted by Black people in different circumstances that conveys a message that is racist, I'm sure unintentionally in the case of 99% of those people, but nonetheless, it is one of those kinds of things in terms of the microaggressions that we also learned about that we have to deal with. But that's only going to be through education and saying, look, understand how you would take this if it was you and your skin was Black and you were confronted by this reality. And so I just want you to know that I think public education is key, and that's an area where we will have to make an investment, especially as regards the larger public as opposed to the people in City Hall, where that's a very important place to start, which we have done.
Thank you.
Much, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Phillips. Anthony, Mr. Morgan, do we have you now, sir?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I think members can hear you loud and clear. Welcome and thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to provide a bit of an overview of the mandate and the priorities of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Community Advisory, Council Advisory Committee. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Thompson, and of course, Mayor Tory, for the ways in which you've demonstrated leadership to support Black communities across the city to advance institutional change for more equitable outcomes for our communities. And we, as Deputy Mayor Thompson has spoken to, and we've seen in the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, many other agencies, other municipalities, even other countries continue to reach out to myself, reach out to my director, Ms. Anania Grant, and our executive director, Denise Andrea Campbell, about the work that we're doing. But in terms of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Council Advisory Body specifically, of course, you'll remember that the context for the creation of this body came out of what is referred to as the racial reckoning, where there was the killing of George Floyd, and then shortly after that, the death of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, which many Black communities and their allies across the city felt there was a resonant connection there. And so there was an advocacy for change, and City Council moved forward in June of 2020 to say, okay, we are going to adopt a number of reforms that aim to make changes in policing. And so out of that conversation that continued over the summer, and of course continues now, ultimately in September 2020, the terms of reference for this group was established. And a number of things were pointed out as critical points of intervention to help this committee be effective in advancing the interests of Black communities across the city. And so within that terms of reference, the things that were prioritized, and this is what formed the grounding for the immediate priorities of the CABRAP, was looking at the fact that we are in the context of the International Decade for People of African Descent, which runs from the years 2015 to 2024. And so this committee aims to support council to advance the interests of Black communities through the principles of the International Decade, which are justice, recognition, and development. But also, this committee was formed with an eye to looking at opportunities that are available at the province and at the federal level, and supporting council in making specific asks on how to support Black communities to get access to a number of opportunities in education, in employment, in housing, in healthcare, in child welfare. And so this committee has been tasked with taking that on to advance the interests of Black communities across the city. There was, of course, because of the context of the development of what we call for short the CABRAC, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Council Advisory Committee. There was also a call to ensure that this body plays a key role in advancing equitable outcomes in policing. And so those four pillars form the grounding for this body, coming out of that specific context and wanting it not to just be a moment, but an opportunity for us to create a legacy of change. And so this body was officially, while the terms of reference were officially adopted in September, then there was, of course, a recruitment process to get a dynamic group of Black Torontonians that we have here assembled now as members of the CABRAC, and the body was launched in May. Since May, we've been working on a concrete priorities, and now we are going to discuss at this meeting what those priorities are. And speaking to some of the comments that you made, Mayor Tory, and of course that you've also echoed, Deputy Mayor Thompson, is these priorities are reflective of some of the gaps or areas of opportunity for our communities. And so what are those priorities? Going forward, the first is a focus on employment and entrepreneurship, which also includes enhancing procurement as it relates to Black organizations. Secondly, there's an aim to focus on increasing access to opportunities in education for Black communities to close the gap that continues to exist between folks who are educated or the opportunities in education within our communities and economic opportunities that are in the labor market. Thirdly, there is a focus on housing and healthcare. In the pandemic, we've seen a considerable pressure put on all communities, but especially Black communities in the areas of housing and healthcare, especially in the context of mental health. And so this committee is going to be focusing on housing and healthcare, looking at the distinct barriers that are there, but also looking at them as they relate to, as they interconnect, as it relates to housing and healthcare. And then finally, of course, the focus on bettering policing, bettering outcomes in policing, looking at some of the work that is already being done and seeing how this committee can provide recommendations to council to enhance that work, but also deepen the partnership with the federal government, with the provincial government to ensure there's equitable access to resources to better policing. And so those are the four key and critical priorities that have been adopted by this committee. And so we're looking forward in the days and months ahead to activating change through this committee on those bases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So, members, there you have it. We've had an excellent presentation and an opportunity to question the mayor. Mr. Morgan has followed up with respect to an overview with respect to the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit and the focus with respect to our committee, how that all relates, and so on. And as he pointed out, we will be addressing further in this meeting the work plan priorities and details and so on. So I want to thank the mayor very much for being able to join us this morning. And you've heard from him in terms of the purpose and the ideas. And we know he's been a strong supporter, certainly of the community, of all communities in Toronto, and particularly the issues confronting the Black community, racism and hate and so on. And of course, these also affect other communities as well. And as Mayor has indicated, that it's the first time in the city's history that we have a program, for example, where city staff are required to train and go through a process and so on. And that's going very well. And the mayor has also talked about the work that's actually happening in policing, and it has been counterbalanced with the comments that Mr. Morgan has just made and so on. And so I will just look to the mayor to see if he wanted to make any final comment and thank him so much for being here. I know he's got a busy schedule, but we do appreciate you, Mayor, being here and to talk to members of the committee. So I'll just turn it over to you for any final comments. Thank you.
Thank you again to the members for serving, and I'll look forward to seeing the results of the work you're going to do today and other days. And I want you to be, constructive but candid, and we'll look forward to that because it's going to be very helpful to us to achieve our goals, which is a much more inclusive city in many of the respects we've talked about today. So thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for your agreeing to take on this position of leadership. Another one. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mayor. Thank you very much, and have a great day and a great weekend. All right, members, thank you. And we are going to move right ahead. Our next item is CR 3.2. We have a presentation. The item is the Digital Infrastructure Plan, Equity, Bias, and Discrimination Consideration. We have Alex Yu, Manager, Connected Community, and Hamish Goodwin, Management Consultant, Technology Services, are here to provide a presentation to members of the committee. And again, invite members to write your questions down and to ensure that you ask questions of staff. So without further ado, Alice and Hamish, if you are there, I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Good morning.
My apologies, Mr. Etta. My apologies. Sorry. That's okay. Just let me do this because I wasn't sure what was happening here. Lawrence Etta, who is the Chief Technology Officer for the City of Toronto, will do an introduction. Both Alice and Hamish is part of his team. And Mr. Etta, it is wonderful to have you with us this morning. And I will turn the floor over to you, and you will introduce your team. I also understand that you may have to leave us for another engagement, and so we just wanted to acknowledge that. So if you do leave and you're not on the tile and screen, people will know that it's not that you're not interested in terms of hearing from them. It's that you have another matter, but you're able. Team members are able to provide you with updates. So again, welcome to you, Mr. Etta, and you have the floor.
Good morning. Through the Chair and Deputy Mayor Thompson, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you to the committee. As the Deputy Mayor mentioned, my name is Lawrence Etta, the Chief Technology Officer, and thank you so much for this community and the team in listening to what we have to state today. In listening to the comments from Mr. Morgan, Mayor Tory, as well as the Deputy Mayor Thompson, the space in terms of digital infrastructure and the ability to ensure that the technologies that are being provided in the city and across the city ensures an equity and inclusive community is extremely important. I will also introduce my team, Alice. We formed a team called the Connected Community Team, Alice and Hamish and the rest of my colleagues who are very focused on this walk. I'll make a few opening statements and then I'll hand it over to Alice and Hamish to go through the presentation. We are very much excited to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to come to speak to you to talk about the draft version of the Digital Infrastructure Plan. This was a plan that was very deep and complex. It's a draft that has had a great deal of research, peer-to-peer learning from other cities and jurisdictions about how we essentially look to ensuring that the city, from a digital infrastructure and technology being an important ecosystem, as we've seen through this pandemic, is ensuring that broad voices and broad areas in the community are part of this consultation process. That consultation process, it includes city staff, it's including external groups. The walk is certainly not finished. It's a journey, and in many ways, this is just the beginning. We are here today to present in terms of the rigorous approach through my staff and in terms of the vast range of emerging and new technologies in terms of how it affects the public interest and themes associated across that. So it is both inward-facing for city staff and public-facing for residents and business. The result of this walk is multi-layered and multifaceted policy document that is founded on principles and vision statements that Toronto City Council has approved and has supported. We are here to discuss the role of technology in our society, to look at the future types of the place we want to live in the city of Toronto, and also how technology is an enabler of that. Technology is certainly not a neutral force. Therefore, the spaces we are today digitally as what we are experiencing now through WebEx and remotely, those solutions have become in intricate and in important areas, but also those solutions may have systemic barriers, biases, discrimination, and existing inequities. So part of the digital infrastructure plan and the principles are how do we address these issues and ensure that the drivers ensures an inclusive society. We are here to ensure that benefits are felt by all across the city of Toronto. We also would like to have feedback from this committee in terms of any of the presentation. How did it resonate? What are areas that we could ensure that we continue to align with the Confronting Anti-Black Racism group? And also any supporting material that you feel can be shared with me and my staff so that we can ensure that the document is a reflection on the Black community. With that, again, thank you. And as the Deputy Mayor stated, my apologies. I have a conflict in terms of a City Manager's Award. But my staff have been working so closely with this, and we're here to hear your voices, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to being continuously connected through this committee. I'll hand it over to you now, Alice. Deputy Mayor Thompson, thank you very much for the opportunity again.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, and good luck with the next event that you have to attend. All the best. Alice and Hamish, over to you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone this morning. And Hamish is just about to share some slides as a guide for our conversation. The goal of the presentation is to give you an overview of the digital infrastructure plan, and we'll talk about why we believe this work is important, as Lawrence has mentioned, and how we're moving forward with creating and applying it in city operations. So the outline of the presentation is in three parts. First, we'll talk about the digital infrastructure plan. Then we'll, dig into a little bit about the equity, bias, and discrimination policies within the digital infrastructure plan. And then we'll give you an overview of the upcoming public consultations as well. So, you may have heard us being introduced as the Connected Community Team. This is a term that we came up with in 2020 after thinking about, what is a smart city and how do we want to play a role in connecting people in our city. So it's beyond technology for technology's sake. Our team's work is about how do we use technology and data to increase and improve quality of life. That's the bottom line. It's not about, trying out new tools that are cool and fun, although that is maybe cool and fun, but it's really about how does technology and data, how does that actually improve the way that we deliver services and improve overall quality of life. And so this, the area that we're in is technology services. And again, it's a real pleasure to be talking about this with you today. When we talk about digital infrastructure, it's quite a broad term, and the plan deals with that in different ways. And so when we talk about digital infrastructure, the definitions on the screen there, anything that really exchanges or creates or uses data or technology falls under this definition. And some examples that we can think about are, for sensors in the public, Wi-Fi, apps, and even the open data standards that we use. Residents interact with and benefit from the city's digital infrastructure in a variety of ways every day, including access, the city's website, using different technologies, paying for things online, and even just using automated meters to monitor water usage, which is why we have that image there. And there are sensors on the road when you're driving for road safety, et cetera, et cetera. And then so when we talk about the digital infrastructure plan, we're thinking about it as changing the way that we deliver municipal services and leading to a number of better outcomes and positive outcomes. And we also understand that as the use of digital infrastructure increases, there's also a lot of harms and that we need to protect against. So in developing this plan, in short, we are looking to create something that will help staff like me make day-to-day decisions, but also help make long-term strategic planning decisions as well. We know that this is a emerging area, like Lauren said, and there's lots of unknowns. And so this plan is meant to bring clarity and certainty, and as a way to engage with residents and businesses and stakeholders. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Hamish, and he will give you a little more detail.
Thanks, Alice, and thanks again to the Deputy Mayor and to the committee for having us today. So a little bit more about the digital infrastructure plan before we get into the specific details. As Alice mentioned, it's a plan or a policy that will guide decision making that's associated with the increased use of digital infrastructure. And again, thinking about digital infrastructure, back to that slide with the water tap, we're talking about technology as well as data, so a very broad scope. So in addition to existing policies and standards that we have around those issues, we have a need for guidance on a number of emerging issues, such as digital rights, equity, bias and discrimination considerations, consent, and when and how to engage the public, in addition to other areas. The digital infrastructure plan has a foundation on 6 principles, sort of noted on this slide through icons. The first 5, equity and inclusion, a well-run city, social, environmental, economic benefits, privacy and security, democracy and transparency. Those first 5 ones were developed through consultations back in 2019 and have been adopted in a working format by City Council. And the 6th one, digital autonomy, which I'll talk about towards the end of the presentation, is a more recent one, also in response to direction from City Council. So going into those principles in a little bit more detail. The first one being equity and inclusion. This principle describes how Toronto will ensure that people can enjoy their rights and freedoms and feel safe and secure online when accessing the city's services and systems and products that they interact with. So some examples of how this translates to policy include promoting digital literacy, digital skills, and recognize the importance of access to the internet, proactively identifying and placing safeguards against systemic barriers, bias and discrimination in digital infrastructure and service delivery, and also through emphasizing the importance of collecting disaggregated socio-demographic data, as well as the need for data governance mechanisms. Some examples of how this would be implemented is through the Data for Equity strategy and the Connect TO program, which aims to bring low-cost internet to communities in need. The next principle is a well-run city. This describes how digital infrastructure can be used to enable better outcomes from the city through such means as evidence-based decision-making and more efficient allocation of resources for the management of public assets, city assets. Tangible outcomes for residents and businesses and visitors would include fewer traffic collisions, better asset management, and improved quality of life. The third principle is social, economic, and environmental benefits, and this one is focused on leveraging digital infrastructure to create a society that supports equitable and inclusive benefits, whether for social, community, health, economic, or environmental prosperity. An example is promoting inclusive and equitable opportunities for digital infrastructure initiatives through the city's procurement program, which aims to create jobs, increase supply chain diversity, and drive economic growth. The next principle is privacy and security, and this one recognizes that with the process of digital transformation and the increasing use of digital infrastructure, it must be positioned to address, or we must be positioned to address potential cyber attacks and disruption of critical systems and potential privacy and security risks to individuals. The DIP includes specific policy statements to protect the privacy of residents and prevent against misuse of data collected by the City of Toronto. The fifth principle is democracy and transparency, and this is a recognition of the city's role in building trust in digital services and infrastructure that supports our community. And this can be done in a variety of ways, including by ensuring that human rights principles of privacy, freedom and expression, and democracy are incorporated by design into the city's digital infrastructure. And an example of that in a policy statement is to ensure algorithmic transparency and accountability to reduce the risk of bias and discrimination that can be or that could be perpetuated through through artificial intelligence, AI. And then finally, this sixth principle of digital autonomy. So autonomy itself refers to the quality or state of being self-governing. And this implies a level of control and independence. So thinking about control and independence in the context of local government and technology, this principle refers to the city's ability to control the selection, use, design, maintenance, and so on over how it delivers public services through digital infrastructure. And that itself can take shape in a number of ways, such as the right to repair our own digital infrastructure assets, ensuring we're less dependent on technology vendors, and also helping to ensure that Toronto Public Service ourselves have the ability and skills to address and accommodate these emerging issues. In the next part of this presentation, I'm just going to walk through some specific policy statements which dive deeper into some of those issues I just touched on. So in the first principle, equity and inclusion, the draft DIP includes a number of policy statements related to equity, inclusion, and human rights. I won't go through these. I understand you've all received a copy of this presentation in advance. So you can see the way that the digital infrastructure plan takes shape as a policy document is you've got the principles at the top, then we have the vision statements. Below that is policy areas, and the policy areas are further expanded upon by these policy statements. So ultimately, it's these policy statements that really are important that we get right, and hence this conversation with you. On the issue of democracy and transparency, some of the policy statements we wanted to highlight were the related to artificial intelligence and the importance of making sure that algorithms operate in a fair and non-discriminatory manner. And then I will move on to the next one. So also ensuring that safeguards are in place to prevent, detect, and remedy unlawful discrimination through the use of AI systems, and establishing appropriate levels of oversight. So those again are some examples of the policy statements that are currently in the draft DIP. In terms of development of this draft DIP, Lawrence already mentioned this, some of the work we've been doing, so I won't go into it in too much detail, just in light of the time. That is to say, however, that it is, as Lawrence mentioned, a journey that we're on. The document is still in draft format. We are undertaking a series of public engagements starting next week on Tuesday, followed by another one on Wednesday, and several more in the following week. All of those are opportunities that we're hoping to engage the public and other stakeholders with to present the document in more detail than I've just gone through, and to get their feedback on how they feel it adequately addresses their concerns around issues such as privacy and security, for example. And obviously with the intent of responding and accommodating those or integrating those comments and feedback we get through that process into the actual digital infrastructure plan, which will be presented to council towards the end of the year, although I should say it's actually more recently been determined that it'll be going in January 2022. So that's just an overview of the process. As a last wrap up, to lead into some discussion and Q&A, we're interested in a conversation with you about how we can build upon the policy statements to ensure that issues of equity, bias, and discrimination are adequately and appropriately addressed. As part of the work, we've identified some policy gaps, and one of those policy gaps is the need for a digital equity policy. So that would be a policy that would come from the city, emphasizing the importance, for example, of access to the internet, affordable access, also access to digital devices as part of that digital literacy and digital skills need is access to devices as well as access to training so that people understand how to use the internet and interact with it safely. And then finally, as part of our consultation process, as mentioned, we are meeting with a variety of groups and organizations. And if you have any suggestions on who else we should meet with, that would also be welcome. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Hamish. So, members, the opportunity to ask questions and to make comments and suggestions and so on is now available to you, and we look forward to your input. So the floor is open. And again, I just want to remind everyone, I can't see everyone at a glance, so some of you are off screen. Ms. Phillips, Jen? Go ahead, please. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Could you put the 3 question areas up? In terms of the last one, who you should consult with, certainly I'm sure that in terms of any access to internet and digital technology and use of hubs, I'm sure that you're already thinking about public libraries, Toronto Public Libraries as a place for that to happen. But I'm also thinking in terms of community health centers and community centers as possible places both for consultation and for potential, partnership around making sure that your digital equity policy and rollout happens in an equitable way. In terms of building on the policy statements, is there going to be a way, some sort of a digital feedback mechanism? Because they look great, but you never know what's missing until you actually implement them, and then people realize, oh, okay, there's this one area that isn't really covered. I mean, just from my perspective, it looks very comprehensive, but I'm sure if there was a mechanism for some ongoing feedback, both prior to finalizing it and once you have finalized it, so it's not the final product, and that is the way it will always be, but that you are, you have an iterative process so that you're collecting information as you go forward. I think that would be valuable. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anne. Hamish, did you wish to comment?
Sure, I'll comment briefly. Thank you, and thank you to the question. Yes, we are working very closely with the Toronto Public Library, so thank you for that suggestion. They are key partners with us on this journey, and I also appreciate the suggestion to meet with or to engage with the community health centres, and also take your point about this being essentially what the DIP is and will be as a living document. We don't profess to have all the answers at this point, and so we're certainly presenting it in a way that it can change and grow over time. This is a really complicated and challenging emerging field for the city, and it's not just the city of Toronto that's dealing with it. It's many cities around the world are dealing with these emerging issues as well around the same time, which is an interesting time to be working in this space. So the way we're facilitating that living document approach is through the consultation. We have the full digital infrastructure plan in draft format will be posted on the city's webpage, where people can, if they're so interested, access it and go through it in their own time and get in contact with us through. We have a variety of channels through our common digital feedback at Toronto email address. Also, our personal phone numbers and email addresses are posted. If people have technology limitations or are uncomfortable using technology, they can refer to telephone if that's easier for them. And so we've tried to be accommodating in that way as well. And certainly welcome as much feedback as we can get.
Thank you very much. Any further question, Halima? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question is similar to Anne's in terms of what the evaluation process looks like with the plan. How is success defined and monitored in regards to the policy statements?
I'll start briefly, and then Alice or my colleague Nabil can jump in. Firstly, excellent question. In fact, it's a brilliant question. It's one that we are grappling with a little bit, to be honest and frank with you. So high level, we see the implementation and evaluation taking shape in a variety of ways. Some of the policy statements are ones that will be easy to measure, whereas others will be a lot more difficult from the sense of the area of the challenge itself, but also the time frame that it would take to achieve success. So as part of the next phase of the project, once we've reported out on the plan, we will then be, the next phase would be determining or developing an implementation plan. And so we would have to kind of dive more deeper into it at that point. Alice, I don't know if you have anything more to add, or Nabil?
Yeah, that's definitely a question we've been really thinking about, and we of course looked at the anti-Black racism action plan and looking at the which items we can closely align the work with. And so, for example, on the issue around giving access of high quality programs to Black children and youth, we have another piece of work that we're working on called ConnectTO, which is all about bringing high speed, affordable internet and free internet where possible to the community. We've been able to bring free public internet into some TCHC buildings as well as more community centers, for example. So that's something that's that we can count, right? That's this many children we were able to gain more access. We've also worked on with the CE Center for Black Young Professionals, working through them to actually have a workplace development program for about 15 youth. So that's another thing that's positive and you can count. But other things like, for example, the health benefits that both you and Ms. Phillips mentioned, that's a little bit harder, right, to quantify. So we are looking at the metrics that make sense, working with our colleagues, of course, across the city who are, who are experts on this space too, and the real brains here too. And so we're definitely going to set those up. And like Ms. Phelps mentioned, it's something that there's a public process for continuous reevaluation and through the implementation. So it's not going to be like, okay, this is it. This is the plan. We're just going to work with it. There's going to be a continued process, like any good plan should, in my opinion, for that evaluation and that changing of the course. So we're, quite honestly, don't have all the answers yet. This is the work, right, that we're trying to do. And so that's why your feedback is so important. Thank you.
We can't hear you.
I have a question, please. Sorry, who is that, please?
Molly-Ann.
Molly-Ann, I'm sorry.
Paris.
Okay, so, sorry, Molly-Ann, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Who else is there? What? Just before you proceed, who else? Sorry?
Paris.
Karis. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so flipping through. Molly-Ann, go ahead, and then Karis, you be next, please. Go ahead, please. And then we have Maya. I can see you now. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for the presentation. So I was thinking in terms of a network group that you could connect. I don't know if you've reached out to them. Is the Black Professional in Tech Network. I believe Lakin is the founder of that. That is a very good group. My question is in relation to the identity-based data, especially as it relates to young people. And I say this because I was in the Youth Justice Division provincially, and we had issue with that. and as it relates to sharing the information, whether internally and externally. And also the other question is in related to accessibility. Those with disability, whether it be visible or invisible, is there consideration embedded in the policies that's already created for those? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Molly. And I'll start and I'll hand it over to Bill and Hamish, if that's okay. We had the pleasure of presenting to the Toronto Accessibility and Advisory Committee earlier this month, and they gave us a lot of great feedback as well. And there are a number of responsive technology elements in the plan now, and hope to have more as we work towards leading in the space. So there are definitely a lot of considerations around that accessibility for not only from a disability perspective, but from other perspectives as well. And in terms of we were specifically asked about data and protection of privacy for young people, in this space. And at the same time, we have also very exciting work that we're doing. They're working with the People and Equity Group here in the city around what we used to be called the disaggregated data, now the Data for Equity policy. So it is a balance, and we are working through that now. And we also are connected with the provincial our provincial partners and sometimes federal partners to get clarity on some of these issues. As you can tell, based on the sort of the breadth of topics here, we're my team is awesome, but we work with all of these other great people and get their advice. So we definitely will continue to work with our partners, and I hope you'll see some development of that in the plan as we move forward. Maybe, I don't know if Hamish and Nabil want to add in?
Yeah, I can jump in. Alice, thank you for that. What I'll just add is that what the question calls for, and I really appreciate this question, is the need for a data governance framework that puts in place rules around how data is collected, how it's processed, how it's shared, who it's shared with. And those are some of the things that we've added into the draft DIP, and you'll see that. But of course, that is also a much longer process that we're continuing to engage with partners in the Office of the Chief Information Security Officer, who are working on digital identity, as well as the City Clerk's Office, who lead privacy and information management policies at the City of Toronto. But this is definitely and at the same time, what I'll also mention, and adding to what Alice said, the province and the federal government are also modernizing legislation around privacy and personal information. So we've been meeting those levels of government as well, and we'll be coordinating with them to strengthen these aspects.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so moving to Terrace now. Ms. Thompson, Newton Thompson, you have the
Thank you for the presentation. And thank you, Deputy Mayor. I wanted to go back. Someone talked about evaluation, and I was wondering, when you collect the data on evaluation, will you be also including identification, like racial identification and so on? I just recently went to the US and I had to fill out a form to get my test, and they asked about your racial background. And because I was wondering, how is it that the US is able to produce information on racial background in such detail? But they ask at the very level of getting a test for COVID. So, I wonder if that would be included. And the other thing I wanted to say, that there are many organizations I'm sure that you have thought about in the Black community, but I want to mention ONAPSI, the Ontario Alliance of Black School Educators, and also the Jamaican Canadian Association. And there are several affiliates with those groups. So if you ask them, they'll be able to furnish you with some more organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alice, go ahead, please.
Sure. These are great organizations to reach out to. I really appreciate the introducing that context to us. In terms of the disaggregated data, that's an area that that's really interesting work. And I think even throughout COVID, when we built the system to collect contact tracing information for COVID cases, the city took a leadership position and started collecting that socioeconomic and demographic data. And that's when we really had the numbers to show, that the virus isn't affecting everyone the same way, that the same inequities are actually exacerbated through this terrible pandemic upon us. So that is the exact kind of thing we want to see more of as we move forward with more digital adoption, because that is exactly why we're building the digital infrastructure plan and have the pleasure of working with our colleagues in SDFA and in People and Equity around, this Data for Equity program. And there are a number of pilots already going on for that program, and we'd be happy to come back another time and talk about that. But that's a big element of supporting the DIP overall. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to get your data, collect the data and see that progress there as well. But that is something we're definitely moving forward with at the city.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Maya.
Yeah, so I think actually Molly kind of touched on the question that I wanted to ask, and I believe Nabil already kind of gave a good response to it, but I did just want to kind of underline and highlight the concern I believe will come out of, the Black community in Toronto, numerous members, just in regards to technology and surveillance, just because I know that in the past, technology has been leveraged as a tool for surveillance in the past. And I think that'll be of great concern to members of the Black community. So just, I guess, more of a comment than a question, but just really underlining that point. I know you mentioned kind of, improving policies around privacy when it comes to, digital networks and IT. So I think that kind of answers my question, but I did just really want to underline that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just looking, I don't see anyone else, but again, as I mentioned, I don't see everyone at the same time on my screen. So if you could just alert me, please, just by unmuting your mic and just announce yourself. If I don't see you, I am sort of trying to move the screen here so I can see more. I don't see any hands and or anyone that's unmuted. I just wondered if I could then just ask a couple of questions around technology, in particular for seniors and Black seniors. So obviously that's a group of people, and seniors in general, some are quite savvy and some are not. I'm just wondering, how are we hoping to reach that group? What's the plan? And then the second part of my question, it's around affordability, because as we talk about using technology and making it available and access to the internet and so on, but some people don't have the ability to, either in some cases buy a phone, buy a tablet, laptop, and so on and so forth. And I'm just wondering, because we want to make sure that there isn't this great divide, we have to play catch up. I'm just wondering, what, as part of your plan, what do you sort of envision, or how do we envision addressing that? I would call it a divide and or a barrier. Just wondering if you had incorporate those sort of thoughts and ideas into the overall plan and the strategy that you're looking at embarking on in terms of really connecting the community. Because failing, you can have all the sort of access to opportunity, but if you don't have the specific tools to really make that connection, because you talk about connecting communities, then, it's as if you haven't done anything. So I'll just leave it to you to comment, Alice and Hamish, and I guess Nabil as well.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And so this is something that's really close to our hearts and something that we really got into over the last 18 months throughout the pandemic. And we have another report that's going to go alongside this one for the January exec cycle as an update to Connect TO, which is a report we brought forward January 2021, actually. And that is actually how we think about actualizing the principles of the DIP. So this is a real program around digital access that we're putting our efforts towards. So when we talk about Connect TO, we're thinking about basically three elements. The first is the policy, including the digital equity policy that we're talking about, as well as others around accessibility, which was also mentioned earlier today. The second piece of work we're talking about is, how do we really think about connectivity as an outcome the city is looking for. Not an end of pipe, not like sticking on at the end of after we've designed everything, but how do we really think about putting connectivity in our affordable housing as we do in development, et cetera. So that's another area of work. And the last one is something we're really excited about as well, which is really getting the connectivity to people. So how do we leverage city assets? In this case, a fiber backbone for the city that we're creating to be able to bring that asset into the equation so that affordable high-speed internet can be the outcome at the end for the vulnerable residents in the city. And we took up on this work after doing research with a number of higher education institutes, including primary research with Ryerson University, to test out speeds and do a survey with over 2,500 Torontonians. And we found that there indeed is, as folks here have alluded to, a digital divide here in Toronto. And that digital divide is along the lines of income and poverty. And we also found, because we were collecting the demographic data, that racialized people are actually more worried about paying their telecommunication bills, so that's your wireless, your internet, et cetera, than others. So we were able to find this through that research last fall, and that's how we set up the program for Connect TO. We're coming back in January with another report for Council's consideration to either expand the program or to move forward so that we can actually bring that sort of bigger benefits to life. In other words, we have a program going forward where the primary goal is to connect underserved communities, including seniors. One of the other research programs we did last fall is focused on tech for seniors. And when they reached out to, it's excellent work. It's on our website, a little plug, so you're welcome to take a look at it, where they were able to offer, a senior tech help. And just about everybody took up, the seniors that they reached out to took them up on this support. And it's a bit of sometimes people think, well, seniors don't want to use technology. Actually, the research shows that they do want to use technology. They need the support, they need the access, they need the digital literacy and fluency to be able to feel comfortable and where they could be vulnerable in this space. So we're definitely considering all of that in the application of Connect TO, and which is, of course, an extension of the digital infrastructure plan. Sorry, I took up a lot of time.
No problem. Thank you very much for that. Could I then just ask two other things? I mean, the public health is working on disaggregated data and so on, and I know the province is doing a lot of work in that space as well. And of course, I think it relates to the question that was asked in terms of, I think it's Chris that raised that, I believe. Just wanting to understand how that sort of connectivity will take place and how that will be incorporated in sort of the plan and the work that's being done. And then the final thing I'd like to ask is, how are you communicating this desire to reach out? I know you're trying to reach out to all communities, but particularly the Black community and so on. I'm just wondering, do you have, let's say, a template that provide notice to communities and that could be provided to councillors, all members of council, because every member of council has a representation of Black members in their community, in their respective wards, just trying to figure out how you're doing that and whether or not you're engaging other councillors and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. To your last question, we did reach out to all members of council with a sample tweet and some social media samples, etc. So we're happy to, if you're able to support us on that, that would be wonderful, and others on the committee as well. And in terms of working together with our partners in the city on the data for equity strategy, we are supporting and we are working in partnership, and it's definitely going to be side by side with the DIP. And we've been given several directions to do that. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone wishing to speak on this particular item? And as I said, I can't see everybody, so if anyone wishes to speak. Anne, I think I see your hand up, and Halimo, I see your hand as well. So we'll start with Anne first, and again, if anyone else wishes to speak, please let me know. So Anne and Halimo, you'll be second. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is following up a little bit on Maya's comment earlier about the concern around surveillance, because I think certainly in terms of facial recognition technology and that sort of those parts of the digital infrastructure, we know that there are that there are biases, and that there certainly can be biases, particularly that are related to skin color and darker skin color. So I'm wondering, what are some ways that you are making sure that you are addressing the issue of connectivity, addressing issues of underserved communities, and at the same time ensuring that there aren't inherent, I will call it inherent systemic racism or inherent biases within the way in which the technology is being rolled out, and the way in which it can then be used as a mechanism for surveillance as well.
Deputy Mayor, I know this is a speaking time. Do you want me to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm really flexible because sometimes things come up and so on. And as in this case, Anne has an additional question and so on. So I'm fine. Yeah, please. Yeah, you can answer that question, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you. Frankly speaking, and first and foremost, I want to just be clear that Toronto Police Service is not under the direct purview of the Chief Technology Officer, Lawrence, my boss, under this particular plan, but we work closely with them. So, for example, their CIO sits on the CIO roundtable that Lawrence chairs as well. There's a meeting coming up in October, and also, of course, we follow direction from council, of course. And in this case, we will definitely look forward to feedback and direction from council on this. And we do have a number of surveillance-related, I suppose, items in the DIP, because that is an issue that's come up quite a bit, and we have specific work that's happening right now around algorithmic bias, which is both in the way that the data is biased, because we do know that the data is biased, and as well in the way that the algorithm is applied. And it's an important topic for the transparency and democracy section and the equity and inclusion section. So as you can see, a lot of these things are very much linked, right? So I want to assure you that we have work underway to address exactly that, and to make sure that the way that we use data and we use technology is as equitable as possible. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so members, we're going to go to Limo. You were next, right?
Yes, thank you. And just to follow up on the Deputy Mayor's question in regards to access and taking on kind of an intersectional lens, there's many newcomers and newcomer seniors in our community where language might be a barrier. So in terms of providing the technical support or going into people's homes, I'm curious what's embedded in the plan to tackle that barrier.
Go ahead, Hamish.
Thanks, Alice. I'll just briefly. That's a great question, and we see that as part of the importance of digital infrastructure being responsive to user needs. And so, what does that mean? So, responsive can take a number of different kind of forms. One of them is obviously being able to access information that the person is in a language that the person is comfortable with, and we definitely recognize that that English is not always, or in some cases rarely, that first language that's spoken. In terms of how that would take place or unfold or be implemented, we don't have the answers fully right now to that. Obviously, the city has a direct link to translation services on their website, but that is a Google tool. However, residents also do have the ability to call 311, and 311 has access to a human human interpreters in, I think, 180 languages. So that would be another option in the interim. I think it's something that we would like to look at in more detail, though, in recognition of the practicalities of those options that I just walked through.
Thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead. Did you have?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to just to add to what Hamish was saying, ahead, and also to respond to Deputy Mayor Thompson. One of the comments you made is, I just wanted to add that one of the policy statements that we've included is ensuring that one is ensuring that all digital infrastructure and services are accessible. The other is that alternative means are provided, recognizing that some people may choose not to use digital services. And one of the policies that we're including is ensuring that people can access non-digital services through non-digital means, because not everyone might want to use that. So that just wanted to add that.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you very much for that. Folks, we need to bring this item to a close because we have a number of other items and presenters and so on, and we have limited time. So I don't see anyone wishing to comment because I'd asked for comments earlier. We had some additional questions. I was just wondering, just before I bring this to a close so we can move ahead, is there anyone wishing to make a comment in order to perhaps bring their thoughts and sort of just to conclude this particular item? If none, that's fine. I just wanted to ask. We thank the presenters and so on. I'm just flipping my screen. I see no one. So let me then just simply do the following. Let me thank the presenters, Alice, Hamish, and Nabil, for their presentation on this very important item. I think it's important to underscore the fact that for members of committee, when we walk away from this and maybe have a sort of second sort of scan at the presentation, we may have additional things that may come up. Obviously, you have the ability to forward those questions and or comments over through to Anthony and his team that will then get forwarded to the technology folks and so on. So we'll get a response. So this is an ongoing dialogue. This isn't just sort of a presentation and we're done. This is an ongoing dialogue with respect to these issues and all the topics that we're dealing with and discussing. So while we may not address everything today and you may think of something later, you have an opportunity to do that, right? So with that, I would just thank the presenters for this and bring this item with the members' concurrence, bring this item to a close and simply move receipt of this. Oh, actually, there's a motion, I believe, from staff. Jonathan, I wonder if you could put the motion up, please. We'll just wait a minute for it to come up on the screen. I don't know about you guys, but I can't see it. But it's coming. It's coming. So I have faith in the clerks.
Chair, you can't see that. I'm sorry. This is Sylvia. I'm attempting to share. I'll take.
No problem. Sylvia. Yeah, no, I can't see it. I mean, I can read what I have here if you wish, but I can't really see that. But I don't know if it's just me.
Again.
Can anybody else see it?
I can see it.
Okay, others can see it. Okay, well, Sylvia, let me just then read it because I'm presuming it's the same thing that I have here, which is a request the Chief Technology Officer to incorporate the committee's feedback into the work on the digital infrastructure plan, right? Is that what you have there? All right, sounds good. So again, I've said earlier, we've had technology challenges all week, so why should Friday be any different in as much as we hope? All right, so members, those of you can see it, you've seen it, you just read it. So all those in favor of that, which is essentially to ensure your comments and feedback that were presented today is incorporated in the plan. And I think that's exactly what we want. All right, opposed? That carries. All right. Thank you. Just before we move on to our next item, I neglected to receive the remarks from the mayor and the presentation from Anthony. So on the first item, I just want to move to receive that item. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Those two items have been dealt with. We're moving now on to the next item, which is CR 3.3, development of a cultural district plan for the city of Toronto. And we have staff who are here to present to you what is, firstly, a district plan. We have the staff members who are here. We have Cheryl Blackman, who is the interim general manager for the Economic Development and Culture Department, and we have Elena Bird, who is a policy development officer with Economic Development and Culture. So they're here to provide a presentation to members of the committee. So we'll turn it over to, I guess, Ms. Blackman and your team. Ms. Blackman, are you here?
I'm here. Good morning, Deputy Mayor and committee members. Thank you for having us this morning. As Deputy Mayor Thompson said, I'm Cheryl Blackman, the Interim General Manager in Economic Development and Culture, and I'm joined by Elena Bird. I'm going to provide a couple of slides at the outset and then turn over to Elena. This presentation is a first step, however, in exploring ways to support our communities in areas that are meaningful for the sense of developing cultural identity or deepening cultural identity and having a face to urban development as we are managing those pressures that come with that. Next slide, please. So this morning's presentation, we're going to share information about a preliminary report for the October 21st Economic and Community Development Committee. And we're also going to seek your advice and guidance on a potential cultural district designation or program that is meaningful for communities and for Toronto as a whole. So on the third slide. Sorry?
Would you like me to go back?
It's okay, we're fine. The slides seem to be advancing a little fast. So no problem. So in economic development and culture, we're working to make equity the spine of our efforts. Economic growth without any intentional focus on equity is not full prosperity. And in our opinion, we want to be sustainable and we want to basically leave our communities in a better position than they are currently so that they're not vulnerable to future economic shocks. So there's currently no cultural district program in Toronto, and through the work that we're about to embark upon, we aim to develop a program that reflects the unique context of Toronto. We recognize the entirety of the City of Toronto is Indigenous, and we also acknowledge that there are no specific districts that are more or less cultural. Every part of the city is meaningful and important to different communities, and through today's presentation, we aim to hear your advice, receive your guidance and your recommendations, and accept your help in informing the way that we move forward to basically arrive at new outcomes that are meaningful for Black communities. Next slide. So the presentation this morning will consist of a brief overview of economic development and culture, a review of the status of the update and council direction that leads us in this work, a look at the policy gaps and the opportunities that are going to come through this work, a sharing of the preliminary research and findings to date, a overview of our early engagement and findings, and then we're going to talk together collectively about next steps and seek your advice and recommendations. Next slide. So as a bit of background, Economic Development and Culture Division is leading the work that we're about to discuss. And within our division, we're responsible for 5 areas. The first area being business growth services, which helps businesses maximize opportunities through programs and services targeted to entrepreneurs, medium and large-sized businesses. Film and entertainment industries, which supports all aspects of the city's film, music, tourism, and entertainment industries. Arts and culture services, which consults and advocates for the city's cultural industries while producing major events and arts programs. And we recently launched Artworks TO, which you may have heard about this past week. And museums and heritage services, which operates 10 historic sites and leads the development and restoration of 100 city-owned cultural and heritage sites. And we've also been working through a program called Awakenings over the last year, where we're bringing anti-oppressive narratives to the front of our storytelling. And also program support, which is leading our efforts around marketing, sponsorship, finance, policy development, and research for the 4 public-facing units that I mentioned above. So ultimately, the goal of EDC is to make sure that business and culture thrive in the City of Toronto. And I'm going to turn to my colleague, Elena Bird, who will provide a status update on Little Jamaica, and she'll also work through some of the ways that we're thinking about the work we're about to embark upon as we think towards developing this cultural district plan and seek your advice and guidance on the work we're about to basically do together. So I'll turn to Elena. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you to the chair and the committee for having us here today. In terms of the Little Jamaica update, the city is finalizing an agreement with the Dev Ontario program to direct $1 million investment to revitalize Little Jamaica in collaboration with the Black Business Professional Association. As well, the city is also engaging with small business sector on the potential creation of a separate property tax class for small businesses to provide targeted tax relief. As well, we are doing ongoing initiatives such as the Community Economic Development Program, the Commercial Facade Improvement Program, Cafe TO, BI Pop-Up Shop, and Show Love TO, which launched very recently. Public engagement regarding Little Jamaica will commence late fall. In terms of the overall council direction related to developing cultural districts, started back in last January from a motion from Councillor Wong Tam related to protecting 2S LGBTQ plus small businesses and cultural spaces. Then in September, a motion was brought forward by Councillor Matlow, as well other motions from Councillor Cole related to supporting Black-owned and operated businesses and preserving the cultural heritage of Eglinton Avenue West, specifically well known as Little Jamaica. And then recently in June, we had a motion from Councillor Layton related to protecting the downtown cultural heritage of Chinatown, and as well looking at a motion from Deputy Mayor Bilal related to Geary Works and understanding how we can support the cultural aspirations of Geary Avenue. Amongst all of these council motions and reports, we had the pandemic hit in March last year, and city staff were very much involved in the emergency response and saving lives in the vaccine rollout, all while making sure that we are helping to support communities through these directions. One of the things that staff do when they're looking at all these different directions is seeing the commonalities. We're seeing that sense that there's a concern from businesses around culture, sense of community, tourism, heritage in communities, and protecting those things that make communities strong and vibrant. So I looked at all of these motions, and we've identified common themes that call for a coordinated policy approach, specifically around relating to protecting the area from cultural erasure from displacement through community ownership of space, avoiding the loss of character and identity of communities through ensuring that there are spaces that promote a sense of belonging in the area, celebrating communities and encouraging new cultural employment hubs, and celebrating the rich history of the neighborhoods beyond those forms. To do this work, we undertook a jurisdictional review and as well grounded the information that we learned from best practices around the world with community engagement here in Toronto to ensure that everything was done in a meaningful way. So in terms of cultural districts, they are a policy tool that's been widely used around the world to respond to similar challenges faced in Toronto. As you can see, we've got examples here from Boston, from San Francisco, from Singapore, Minneapolis, Sydney. And in some senses, this is a great opportunity for us to learn from other cities and to ensure that we're bringing the best to Toronto. In terms of the jurisdictional review, we found that there are over 343 formal cultural districts in the United States, and there are many around the world. And we specifically looked at communities that had recognized, like officially recognized cultural district programs. Cultural districts happen whether or not communities are recognized by the government. Governments don't make culture, communities make culture. But in this case, there's this opportunity for the government through these programs to help support the goals of the cultural district program. And so we did a very deep dive into 9 cities that are listed here, including our neighbor in Mississauga, but also very much looking towards the policy tool. And so research cultural districts really help to ensure that Indigenous history and programming in their cultural districts. And the cultural districts allow the community, businesses, and government to come together around cultural funding, programming, and opportunities to support local retail. So, for instance, we've been looking very closely at the Legacy Business Program in San Francisco as a mechanism to support local retail. In terms of our early engagement, we have spoken with over 60 partners, stakeholders, and community members from the different areas related to the council motions that I mentioned earlier. Some of the things that we heard that were key was the importance to recognize the history in pushing oppressed communities into spaces that were not ideal, and also to acknowledge the history that led to geographic areas being meaningful to communities. So, for instance, the importance of safety, sense of community, sense of identity. That the government support for communities should not be bounded by the district. So while specific geographic areas may be meaningful and may have these community anchors, it should not concentrate or in any way specifically concentrate all of the communities, businesses, and cultural spaces in that area, because in many cases, Toronto is very diverse and those communities are across the city as well. It's important to acknowledge and target the root causes of displacement and gentrification, such as affordability, community ownership, and ensure that the combination of policy tools is inclusive and that an intersectional lens to the cultural district is applied at all times. And then finally, to consider the designation or program placemaking methodology for communities. to ensure that these are not one-off situations, but that it actually thinks about all the resources that the city can provide and look at an opportunity to do things differently to help support communities. So in terms of the proposed approach, cultural district designation as a combination of tools to protect small businesses and cultural spaces and heritage within meaningful communities to Toronto may address this policy gap. And as you can see, our methodology at this point is really to address these common themes, to enhance effective use of city resources through addressing the policy gap, supporting all of this work through understanding best practices and gathering good information through research, and informing this through early engagement. So in terms of the next steps, we are really at the end of the phase 1 of cultural district research gathering. We've, as you can see, identified the common themes, did the best practices, early engagement, and we're coming forward with a report in October to Economic and Community Development Committee, recommending that a placemaking methodology, so around cultural districts, be developed for Toronto to identify tools to address the considerations and the opportunities identified in phase 1. And then we will be moving to phase 2. Council will support this direction and bringing forward a final staff report in April and spring of 2022. And that will include recommendations on the final program based on a
Sorry, Elena, just lost your audio. Sorry, to the host, I think we've lost the audio.
I apologize. I think I lost my audio. Can you hear me now?
You're back. You're back.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Let's find this. I will attempt to get back to the sharing mode. I can find my slide.
I did warn everybody this morning before we began this meeting that we've had a week of technology challenges and so on. And so Friday is apparently no different, but we will forge ahead. So Elena, take your time, take a deep breath. We're going to get this. So
thank you.
We're good. No problem.
I appreciate it.
Let me know when you're ready. You're sounding great now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so as I was saying, and thank you for your accommodation for this technology thing. So essentially, as part of phase 2, we're going to do broad community consultation. We're really going to look at that program design element of the cultural district designation, and then as well ensure that the program design is reviewed through a design review panel to ensure that we're really learning from communities who are already engaged in this work so that we can be as innovative and thinking about what we're doing in the most forward motion way. So the next slide. All right. So as you can see, we're very much at the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And we're very interested in your advice and recommendations on this work. There are 2 questions for you. From your perspective, what needs to be considered for the cultural district designation to be meaningful for communities? And what do you see as the most important step for us to take in phase 2 of the public engagement to inform this work? So thank you again. I will now stop sharing and we can go to the discussion.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation. And members, there were 2 questions. And in essence, what we are looking for is your inputs, your thoughts, any questions in terms of what's a cultural district? I know it's been presented, but like, how will it actually work? And I think I think Elena, in your presentation, you talk about ownership, which is, I think, an important piece of this conversation. You can have all the designation you want, but if you own nothing in the designated area, guess what? It really doesn't matter. I mean, it's just basically putting lipstick on a pig, quite frankly. And so we don't want to do that. We want to have structural ownership and so on. And so those are some of the work that that's taking place. Chris, I can see your hand finally. So I'll start off with you, please, and go ahead, Ms. Thompson. And again, as I said, I don't see everyone on the screen when I look at a glance. So if there are others who wish to either unmute themselves, let me know, and or put your hands up, and hopefully we'll get through this. So go ahead, please. You have 5 minutes to question staff, and you can speak later on, right?
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for the important presentation. Regarding your first question, I think that something that ought to be considered is our cultural districts that were present before look at. I remember Blackburn Street between Lenox and DuPont being a cultural hub for the Black community in the 70s and earlier. And so many people from our community have lived in that area. For example, Stanley Grizel and I forgot this person who was very instrumental in forming the Ontario Human Rights Commission and the Urban Alliance on Race Relations. But we had the Third World Bookstore, we had Contrast newspaper, and then currently we have a different book list and some other places in that area. So it's really important to go back and look historically at areas that actually were occupied by Black people, and with great businesses, and still there's some businesses in that area, and I'm sure there are other areas in the city as well. We know, for example, about Thornton Blackburn, who was the first taxi driver in Toronto, and his taxi was the color that the TTC uses right now, and this was back in the 18th century or whatnot. So there are lots of historical areas that we need to be thinking about. And I know that we're saying, well, we don't, not all of the areas would have our ownership of businesses and so on, but it definitely, we need to be recognizing those places. And then in terms of the steps of public engagement, I just want to reiterate that we need to do a broad look at the public. The public is not only the young people, the public is people who have historical memory of things in our community. And so we have to reach out to those people.
Staff an opportunity to comment on the point made, which are extremely important points. Ms. Blackman?
So thank you so much, Deputy Mayor Thompson, and thank you so much for your comments. Absolutely, the intention of our work is to look both historically and at the current, as well as into the future, to establish our framework for action. And so your feedback is well deserved, and we will continue to embody that as we're doing this work. I'll turn to Elena and Mariana, who's also joining us. Mariana Mota, part of our team. Are there any comments you'd like to add in response to the awesome feedback we've received just now?
I think it's an excellent point, and I think that it's something that we need to really understand as part of Toronto's storytelling and Toronto's history. And I think that there's opportunities within economic development and culture to ensure that that community history is part of Toronto's overall storytelling, and also to talk about those stories of migration and change within geographies of communities as part of the Cultural District program.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? I'm looking at my screen. I see none. So I will thank our presenters for this. And we have a motion on this item. I'd like to ask staff just to put the motion on the screen. And I'm not sure why I can't see the motion, but maybe staff, if you wish just to read the motion, if it's not seeming to reach everyone. Okay. Can everyone see that? All right, see a shaking head. All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that carries. Thank you. We're moving right along now, folks, to the next item, which is CR 3.4, recognition, review, and renaming of Dundas Street project update. Again, we have the acting general manager for economic development and culture, as well as the lead and driving force and staff lead on this issue with respect to the recognition, review, and renaming of Dundas Street. And so we have an update from Ms. Cheryl Blackman. Ms. Blackman, you have the floor.
Deputy Mayor, thank you once again for the introduction. But before I begin, I also want to thank Deputy Mayor Thompson for his leadership on this file. As the chair of this committee, as the chair of Economic and Community Development Committee, and for the work that he's doing as a councillor in Scarborough, Deputy Mayor Thompson has been an enormous support to this file, and we're very, very grateful. I just want to make that acknowledgement before we begin. Next slide. So in our presentation this morning, we're going to provide you an overview of the recognition review and Dundas Street renaming petition, give you some context. We're going to review the renaming process, the supporting residents and businesses that it's basically being undertaken. And we are going to talk about Dundas Street and the approaches to a commemorative framework. And I'll be joined in this presentation by Ben McIntosh, who's worked with me on this file very, very closely. So as you may have heard, on July the 14th, City Council voted to rename Dundas Street and the civic assets bearing Dundas's name because of the role Henry Dundas played in delaying the abolition of the slave trade. The purpose of our presentation is to provide you an overview of how staff have reviewed and responded to the petition to rename Dundas Street. And we want to get you an update on basically the plans that are going forward as we head towards our next update to Council in 2022. City Council has also directed staff to undertake a broader review of the city's commemorative policies and programs in order to examine and respond to the ways that systemic racism may have been embedded in other city monuments and place names. And the broader effort is being referred to as the recognition review. We are also going to provide you the information about this work and the development of the framework that guides the way that we're going to move forward to commemorate public figures and events in public spaces and monuments. Next slide. So ultimately, the work that we're doing with the recognition review, it's going to help to advance key goals related to confronting anti-Black racism action plan. It's going to underscore Council's commitment to truth, reconciliation, and justice, and it will also deepen the equity-related policies and plans of the City of Toronto. In particular, this work will also support recommendation number 20 in the CABR action plan to make city spaces more accessible and welcoming to Black Torontonians. It is built on the foundation that a stronger, more inclusive and accessible city is something that happens through intention, not by accident. And we are aiming to be equitable and community-centered in our approach to consultation, naming, and commemorative processes. Our work is
Blackman,
also—
just before you move on, can I just interrupt you for a sec?
Yes,
I wonder, I see a small tile with the information, but I wonder if it could be shared so it's actually full screen, because it's not full screen, at least not from my end anyways. I don't know if it's full screen at other ends. And again, maybe it's just a challenge we're having with the technology, but can everybody else see it? Is it just, it's just a small tile, and I think it would be much more informative and helpful if we're able to have it on the full screen.
Deputy Mayor,
Ben,
from
is there
my
something?
perspective, it's showing as a full tile, so I'm not sure, Ben.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, is it showing
I'm
as
not
one?
sure. Okay, but
This is the
if it's
host. I
showing as a full
apologize.
screen for everyone. Go ahead, host. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that Ben is sharing it in such a way that it's taking over a large portion of the screen. What may be happening on your end, Deputy Mayor, is that the specific view that you have currently active on WebEx may be making it a little hard to see. But I can tell you that if you have it currently in your layout in grid view, you will be able to see the presentation in its entirety. And I can also confirm that on YouTube, the entire presentation is visible.
Fantastic. I'm less worried about me, and I was more worried about everyone else because I'm aware of this information. So as long as everyone else can see it, happy. I'm really happy. So please proceed, Ms. Blackman, and thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, not at all, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for checking to make sure that the information is visible. So I'll just continue to say that in regards to this slide, the work that we're doing is really meant to reaffirm the city's commitment to recognize the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. And we also want to recognize that the renaming review and its associated actions are regarded as a legacy project of the decade. Next slide. So in July 2020, Council received the petition to rename Dundas Street. So ultimately, the petition was circulated against the backdrop of what Anthony Morgan was speaking about earlier in terms of the protests following the killing of George Floyd. While the events of last summer brought scrutiny to the origins of the monuments and the street names in our city, these conversations were not new to any of us. And this has been a part of a legacy of ongoing activism of Black and Indigenous communities. The horrific discoveries of unmarked graves at former residential schools has once again also brought questions about how we commemorate colonial figures to prominence nationwide. So in September 2020, Council directed staff to undertake research and initial consultation to recommend a response to petition. And ultimately, we came up with 4 options, which were to either do nothing, which was not recommended by staff, to number 2, retain the street name with additional interpretive measures, such as plaques or a ceremonial name, or number 3, retain the street name, but change the name of civic assets named for Dundas, with the exception of TTC stations, which are generally named after the street, or to rename the street and all related civic assets. So I'll turn to Ben McIntosh, who will provide you information about what has actually transpired as a result of these recommendations. Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. So in terms of how we went about going to develop our recommendation for this report. So staff undertook a 3-pronged review process. First, we took a look at historical research related to the life and legacy of Henry Dundas. We examined the peer-reviewed academic research that was available on the subject and consulted with over 20 academic experts and found that there was a really clear consensus among historians that Dundas's actions were instrumental in delaying the abolition of the slave trade. I'll just give you the history in a nutshell here. So Dundas was a very prominent cabinet minister in the 1790s in Britain. And in 1792, a member of parliament brought forward a proposal calling for the immediate abolition of the slave trade. Dundas, however, amended the motion, instead calling for a gradual abolition. There's been a lot of debate about what exactly that meant. Some have argued that he was trying to pursue a pragmatic compromise approach. But the majority of scholars, on the other hand, don't believe this and feel that it was an attempt to delay the abolition of slavery. While there was a lot of debate about what his motivations might have been in 1792, his intentions become a lot clearer in the years that followed. Afterwards, Dundas became the Secretary of War in the British cabinet and spearheaded a new policy to use slaves as part of the British Army to quell rebellions in the West Indies. Because of this policy, the British government became the single largest individual slave purchasers in that time period. So looking on balance at the history, there's very clear consensus among historians that Dundas played a really strong role in delaying the abolition of the slave trade. And as a result of his actions, scholars attribute over 500,000 more Africans being trafficked into slavery as a result. In addition, we also took a look at global case studies, so how other cities were dealing with issues around removals of monuments and reviews of street names. We used this to be able to identify best practices that we could use to apply in the Toronto context. Both our review of global case studies and our review of historical research is available online as a resource for members of the public. And we also worked with the Toronto Public Library to develop a reading list around historical research and issues of monument and street name reviews. So this is found online at our website, toronto.ca/recognition review. In addition, alongside this research work, we also undertook discovery sessions. So these were initial consultations we wanted to hold with members of communities that are most impacted by the issues that we're talking about before we go out and do broader public consultations. So we held these initial sessions with Black and Indigenous community leaders, as well as business improvement areas located along Dundas Street, residents associations, and other Black business owners. The purpose of these sessions were to test out the initial 4 options that the city was considering in response to the petition, but also seek feedback on how we could engage the broader public in a conversation about this really difficult issue. From those sessions, there was really clear consensus among all the groups we spoke to that engaging the public on any option other than a full renaming of Dundas Street would be compromising the city's commitment to confronting anti-Black racism and advancing Indigenous truth and reconciliation. They also cautioned about the potential for divisive debate if we did go out and frame a broader public consultation around the question of do we or don't we rename a street. So with this community's important advice in mind, and also the findings of our historical research and global case studies, we brought forward a recommendation to council to initiate a renaming of Dundas Street. So council adopted this in July of 2021 and requested that staff initiate a process that would be guided by a community advisory committee. And I'll speak to that process in more detail in just a moment. Council also asked us to look at a range of different names for Dundas Street and the various civic properties named after Dundas. So there's 3 city parks, there's Young Dundas Square. So Council's asked us to look at a range of different names that could help us to celebrate Toronto's rich culture and diversity through a range of different names. So with Council's direction, we're going to be reporting back to the Executive Committee in 2022 with recommendations for new street and city property names, as well as a transition plan to support local residents and business. So for the renaming process, we're going to be forming a community advisory committee that will include Black and Indigenous community leaders, as well as representatives of the other diverse communities living and working along Dundas Street. This will also include representatives of business improvement areas and resident associations. We're currently in the final stages of forming this committee. We've been working with the local councillors' offices for councillors representing Dundas Street wards to nominate representatives to join the group. And I've also been working with the CABR team as well as the Indigenous Affairs Office to nominate some additional community leaders to help fill out the group. So this group is going to be responsible for developing a short list of names. And that short list is going to be shared with the public for input later in the fall. Once we've received input from the public, the committee is going to take a look at all the information we've received and select some final names to recommend to City Council by Q2 of next year. In addition, we're going to be working with our strategic communications team to run a campaign to make sure as many residents and businesses are aware of this work as possible, to help prepare for the upcoming name change, and to share the name once it is adopted. A key component of our work also is going to be around developing a transition plan to support businesses and residents who might be impacted by this change. So Dundas Street, as you know, is one of the biggest streets in Toronto. I often refer to it as the second most complex street in the city behind Yonge. It's home to over 97,000 residents and 4,500 businesses that will be impacted by this work to change the name. Most residents are not going to incur a cost as a result of the name change. In general, address changes can be made online or by phone, and while it does take time to update information, there won't be a direct cost to residents. Businesses, on the other hand, will incur some costs as a result of this change. They may have to update marketing materials, letterhead, other supplies. And there's approximately 60 businesses along Dundas that have that have Dundas as a part of their legal or branded name. These businesses will have higher costs as they may need to rebrand and if they choose to change their name, replace signage as well. Council has directed staff to take a look at exploring a full cost recovery program to make sure these businesses are supported and are able to change their name if they choose at relatively no cost. So the city manager, through our team, is going to be looking at developing a transition plan to support all residents and business. We're going to be looking at a range of different strategies to try to make this as easy as possible for people. Some of the things we're looking at include automatic mail forwarding by Canada Post, working with tech companies like Google and Waze to update online search results for businesses. We're going to be considering specific supports for vulnerable residents, including TCHC complexes, Toronto Community Housing complexes along Dundas Street, and other strategies that might be recommended by the business improvement areas and residents associations that we speak to as part of this process. I'll now turn to Cheryl to speak a little bit more about what we're thinking about beyond Dundas Street.
Thanks a lot, Ben. So as we move beyond Dundas Street, it's clear to us that the efforts to bring forward a review of Dundas Street, while it is certainly a prominent example, there are other commemorative street names, place names, and monuments that have also been critiqued for honoring subjects that are no longer considered to be reflective of the city's contemporary values. So staff are aware of approximately 60 other street names, primarily small local roads, which could require further examination, including at least 12 street names that were named after slave owners. The list of the 60 is a compilation of names that have already been cited in media articles and academic studies, or that have been reviewed or changed in other Canadian cities. So City Council has requested that staff develop a new framework to guide how the city commemorates public figures and events in monuments, streets, and name places. And the new framework will set out a process for how we approach names reviewing this as a kind of a regular moving forward glance at a future where we're guided by a whole range of different possibilities. So as a next step, staff are going to seek public feedback on guiding principles for the next and the new framework. We're going to test those practical applications of the principles to names selected for new streets and civic assets in the coming months. And we also are going to be navigating through a moratorium on further naming and renaming of city properties previously directed by council to remain in place, just to ensure that we can actually establish this new way of doing business. Next slide. So we are now working to implement council's direction on the next steps for the recognition review. In the coming weeks, we're going to be forming a community advisory committee made up of Black and Indigenous leaders, historians, and representatives of the diverse communities living and working along Dundas Street to select a new name for Dundas Street and the civic assets bearing Dundas's name. We are also in the final stages of a competitive procurement process to hire a facilitator to plan and implement public consultation related to the naming process and the commemorative framework. And we intend to begin public engagement by mid-fall. In addition, we will be working with partners to develop a comprehensive transition plan to support residents and businesses impacted by this change. We're going to be keeping this committee updated on the work related to the recognition review and the opportunities for you to participate in community consultations on this project. And I plan to return hopefully to this meeting with deeper knowledge and background information regarding our engagement process as soon as it becomes clear how that's going to roll out, to seek your feedback and as well as to get your input on the new commemorative policy. So I'd like to turn back to Deputy Mayor Thompson and to the committee for any questions.
Thank you very much, Cheryl and Ben. And as Cheryl has indicated, this is an opportunity for members to ask any questions that they may wish to ask on this item. Therese, I see your hand up again. Thank you. And I'm just before I get to you, please, I'll just get you inside. Let me just flip my screen for a sec to see if I see any other hands. I don't. So over to you, please. You have 5 minutes.
There is another hand I can't recognize now. I think it's Yaya. Is it Yaya?
Oh, I've just seen it now. I've just seen, Maya's hands up now. I've seen
Maya.
You now, Maya. So go ahead. Yeah, thank you. It's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh,
go ahead.
Not
Thanks.
me?
Go ahead, please. Yeah, no, I'm going to start your time over. It seems you've lost 13 seconds already. So if we could just start the time over, please.
It's okay.
No problem. Go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Cheryl and Ben, for bringing us up to date with what's happening in Dundas Street. I have a comment, and I'm going to try to frame this as diplomatically as I can. In the synopsis of the historical process that took place for the renaming and for recommending the renaming, there were references made to slaves. Our ancestors were enslaved. They were not born slaves, they're not slaves. So I would request that any future presentation that talks about that whole process, that painful and traumatic process that our ancestors had to undergo, and that has left us with this intergenerational trauma that we're trying to overcome, that they're referred to as enslaved Africans and not as slaves. Thank you.
So thank you for that correction, and we will absolutely make sure that that's taken care of going forward. There is absolutely no doubt in our minds that, the trauma that was brought to enslaved Africans as a result of the behaviors that were underscored by the change that we needed to take to address Henry Dundas's his decisions, quite frankly. We want to make sure that that is not lost. And so this is why, this effort has really focused on ensuring that the historic reflections about Henry Dundas were done through the lens of experts in academia. So we will absolutely make that part of our correction as we unfold this work. And thank you for that feedback.
Thank you, Maya. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank our presenters for the amazing presentation, as well as everyone who kind of, really did the work to propel this initiative. So my question, I noticed that in the slide earlier on in the presentation that kind of listed out the recommendations, one of the proposed items was to rename Dundas Street along with all civic assets relating to Dundas Street. But then I noticed later in the presentation, I think it was Ben who communicated that Dundas Street and various civic assets relating to Dundas Street would be renamed. Now I may be reading a little bit too deep into the diction that was used, but I just want to clarify anyway. So are there some civic assets that will not comply with the name change, or is it all civic assets, including the Dundas Street itself?
So I'll turn to Ben just to clarify.
Yes, just to clarify, yes, all civic assets bearing Dundas's name will be renamed. So that includes there's three parks, there's Young Dundas Square, there's 2 TTC stations. I think that's it. I may be missing a few, but if there's any others, they will be captured on our list as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands. And okay, I just want to, just from my perspective, just to make a couple of comments, and I think it's important. And thank certainly Cheryl and Ben for the presentation. I think it's really important to mention 2 specific names and a point associated with this. That first and foremost, I'm not sure how how much time members have given to this issue in terms of following it. While it was very active a few months ago in terms of the work that Ms. Blackman and others and Ben and others were doing in City Council. But there's a name that William Wilberforce, I think I'd want to mention, because he was the person that was moving motions to trying to address this issue. And it's his motion that Dundas amended, right? And so it's really important. The other point I just wanted to make with respect to this is that the name Dundas is prominent throughout Ontario, Southern Ontario. It seems to be everywhere. And the reason for that is that Dundas was a very important member of William Pitt's government. And in essence, he was the foreign ministers. I mean, that's kind of what it's akin to. And so people like John Graves Simcoe, who was the governor of this area, he saw fit to, expand the name Dundas for a person who, in fact, he reported to in the UK, in London. And so that's really important. And then the final point to make is that Dundas never once visited Canada, had no connections to Canada at all. So that is something I just wanted to provide some additional information to members of the committee. Does anyone wish to speak to this item? I know we've asked questions already. If you don't wish to speak, that's fine. But I have an idea, and I thought I have a motion that I've sort of submitted to staff. I'm not sure if it's actually ready. And maybe maybe because I can't text the staff while I'm speaking to you, is just maybe whether or not the clerk has the motion that I'd like to move, and perhaps we can discuss that, and I'll explain it in a moment. Madam Clerk, or Mr. Clerk, do you have the motion?
Mr. Chair, we do have a draft. If it's okay with you, I'll just send it to you by email so you can have a quick look before we display.
Yeah, okay, I'll have a quick look. But right, so members, while that's happening, I basically want to tell you what I'm trying to offer and going to put forward to members of this committee. As Ms. Blackman has indicated and Ben has indicated, there's an opportunity for names to be submitted. And I have been talking about a specific name for Dundas for some time. And I don't know whether or not members of this committee think it to be appropriate, but I want to submit it. And I'm happy if you voted it down because you think that that's not something that should be considered. But I wanted to put forward a name, and that name would be for consideration, of course. Doesn't mean it will or will not be, but it's for consideration. And that name would be Diversity Street, right? That really reflects on who and what we are in the city and so on. We talk a lot about diversity, but I think it's really important for us to sort of not just simply talk about it, but to obviously really incorporate it and value it. And I think that the mayor's appearance today and talking with us about, the goals and objective of this this committee and the unit and so on in terms of what it's designed to do really reflects certainly a direction and a focus in which we are trying to ensure we address this issue. And as Ms. Blackman has spoken about, their issues that's been outstanding for quite some time, and I think it's extremely important. I'm just, Madam Clerk, I'm fine with the language that the refinement on my motion. That I'm satisfied with that. If we could actually maybe just put that on the screen. But the idea is just to submit this name, and if members of the committee are, in agreement, then we could vote on it. If you don't like the name, you vote against it, that sort of thing. But at the same time, we know that there are other opportunities for you and the members of the public to provide submission for names and so on, and those names will all be considered. So I wonder if the staff could maybe just put the motion on the screen now. Yeah, so the revised motion is there. Request the interim general manager, economic development culture, to incorporate the committee's feedback into its work on the recognition and reviewing and renaming of Dundas Street, and request a community advisory committee on renaming Dundas Street once formed to consider the name Diversity Street as a replacement for Dundas. So that's what I have in mind. I've been talking about it for some time. And so I'm available for questions if anyone has any questions regarding that aspect of the name. This is just a thought I have, and it is something that I think would reflect the interest and the need for all the people of Toronto in terms of going forward. So I'm available if there's any questions. Ms. Phillips?
I had another name in mind, but I love the idea of Young and Diversity Square. So the idea of Diversity Street sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. But remember, your ideas can be put forward as well to the committee. It's open, right? It's available to everyone. So absolutely.
I will do that as well. Well, I'll throw out my idea was Grizel in honor of Stanley Grizel. But anyway, I think I like the idea of diversity.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. But as I said, we could actually forward that information on to Ms. Blackman and her team for further consideration. I just thought I'd bring that here. Therese?
I was just, when I look at the motion, it looks like two separate motions.
There's two component parts of the motion. One is obviously to incorporate the information that is being presented, and the idea, for example, your idea with regarding enslaved as opposed to slave will be part of that. So that's the first portion. The second portion is really just to reflect on the diversity street in terms of the renaming. Just in the interest of time, we've incorporated that both.
I understand that, but if someone wanted to abstain or to say no to the diversity street, they don't have an opportunity, because then
So what we could do, we could separate it out in order for you to do that. So just ask the clerk to be able to separate the two, and we can have a vote on the both of them separately. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So anyone else with respect to? I don't see anyone else. I'm just looking. Just give the clerk a moment to be able to separate, and then we'll have a vote on the items. Okay, Mr. Clerk, when you're ready, or Madam Clerk, when you're ready, please let me know. You can put the items on the screen. We'll separate the two. We can always go on to the next item if you need some more time. We can always come back to this. So please let me know what will work for you. Additionally, members, we are approaching 12:30. Generally, these committees tend to break for lunch. So it's really up to you. After this item, we have two other items left, which is the Community Safety Initiative and the work plan priorities. If you choose to work through just to complete the agenda, I'm satisfied with that. If you want to break for lunch, that's, I guess, Madam Clerk, you can help me to underscore this point. Is it an hour and a half, and so on, or we can get what needs to be done within that particular period of time, assuming that the clerks are okay with that, because they are obviously working behind the scenes. So what say you, members of committee, would you like to work through, and then we, at the appropriate time, we can move basically in the motion to just to complete the agenda, and then you have the rest of the afternoon. And I'm not sure what it's like outside, whether it's raining or sunny or whatever, but it's totally up to you. So what say you, members of committee?
I would prefer to work through.
Okay, work through. Is anybody else? Go ahead, please. Chris?
Same here. I'm just saying yes, I'm prepared to work through.
Okay, sounds good. It seems that I see nodding of heads and so on. So if there's anyone who is opposed to just working through to complete the agenda, please let me know. But it seems that there is a vast majority of the members of the committee who are prepared to work through. So as we get a little bit closer to 12:30, I would just, I guess, Madam Clerk, if it's okay, I can just move now that we extend to complete the agenda. I don't know whether or not that's and procedurally if it's an issue, or do I need to wait until we get closer to 12:30?
Mr. Chair. Go ahead, Sylvia.
No, go ahead, Jonathan.
Sorry. Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's up to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. If it's up to me, then I would just move that now that we extend to complete the agenda. I would just move that now. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So we will move to complete the agenda. So clerks, I wonder if you could tell me, have you been able to separate the motions on the initial omnibus motion that was in front of us?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So I now have two motions for you, a Part A and a Part B. So I will display them in turn.
And I would ask for a recorded vote on Part B. So part A of this item, all those in favor, which is basically to ensure that the information and the comments that have been made with respect to this presentation is viewed for consideration. So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. Then on the next item, Madam Clerk, I'm going to ask for a recorded vote on this particular item. So I'd ask you to basically canvass the members of this committee for their votes. And this will be part of our public record, demonstrated who is supported and who is against. So this will be, you will be noted in terms of the vote. So this is a vote. So Madam Clerk, I will ask you to go ahead, please, and canvass the members.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah. So I will do the recorded.
Please go ahead.
Members.
Yes, of course, Jonathan. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On motion B on part B of the motion from the chair, members, when I call your name, please unmute your mic, indicate your vote by stating in favor or opposed. Adam Lake. Apifa Ajivon.
Opposed.
Beverly Jean Daniel. Cherish Newton Thompson.
Abstain.
Deborah Barnes.
I'm sorry to jump in there, Jonathan and Mr. Chair. Was that an abstention that we just heard?
That's what I heard.
Yeah. So
yes.
So members of the committee, the rules of procedure do not permit for abstentions. So if you are present and able to vote, we would request that you vote either in favor or in the negative.
Oppose.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you for clarification. Deborah Barnes.
In favor.
Ali Muhashi.
In favor.
Juanita Kwarteng. Juanita Kwarteng. Member Juanita, I can see you you're on the call. Please unmute your mic. Justice Betty.
I think she's here today, Jonathan. She's not here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Justin Namara.
In favor, in light of the fact that it provides for inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Eman Phillips.
In favor.
Thank you. Maya Yaya.
I think I'll oppose.
Thank you. Councilor Michael Thompson.
In favor.
Molian Ware.
Oppose.
Monique Hanson. Monique Hanson, absent. Theophilus Ajay.
Motion in favor.
Give us a minute, Chair. We'll just double checking the votes here.
Oh, no problem. Go ahead, please.
Can I just repeat for Apifa? Can I have your vote, please? Again, sorry.
Opposed.
Thank you.
Jonathan, did you call Justine?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
Justine Namara.
Is she there?
Yes, I voted in favor in light of the fact that it provides for inclusion.
Okay, no worries.
Thank you.
I hadn't recorded that one. Thank you, Justine.
Juanita Quarting, please. Juanita Quarting, your vote, please. I could see her on the one of the tiles. One last chance, Juanita Quarting. Thank you. I will just.
So she's absent, right?
She's absent.
Jonathan? She's absent. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Yes, Jonathan.
The motion carries with a vote of 6 in favor, 4 opposed, and with 4 absences.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so that carries. Thank you. All right. Do we have to do anything else with this item, Jonathan? I think we've dealt with it, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. We're moving right ahead. Our next item is CR 3.5, Community Safety Initiative. It says Mr. Morgan, I think you are up, sir. And so Anthony Morgan, the manager of Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, Social Development, Finance, and Administration, will provide the committee with a presentation. Go ahead, please, Mr. Morgan.
Good afternoon. Are my sound issues okay?
You sound fantastic. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jonathan, if I could ask you to share the presentation. Good afternoon, committee members. I'm presenting this offering to provide the committee with an overview on some of the major community safety and related policing initiatives that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit is directly connected to, but also that are happening within the division that the CABR unit is connected to, and that is Social Development, Finance, and Administration. You see here, it's called SDFA. Now, before I go too deep into the rest of the presentation, what I want to really reiterate from the outset is that this is really meant to be an overview, a general understanding, because there are a number of different teams. There's a police reform unit, there's a community safety and well-being team, there's a community development unit. There are a number of different units within the SCFA family of teams that are much more deeply embedded in leading this work. But I wanted to take this opportunity to share it with you so that it helps influence and inform your way forward in the activities that you pursue in the development and implementation of your work plan. We can move forward to the next slide. Now, generally what I want to say is that there has been recognition from Black communities and also Indigenous communities and folks who have had disproportionately high contact with policing within our city, who have said what the city needs is a coordinated approach to addressing community safety issues. And so the city has meaningfully responded by working not just internally, but also with Toronto Community Housing, Toronto Public Health, the TTC, of course the Toronto Police Services, but also the school board to make sure there is a more coordinated approach to the ways in which the city addresses issues of community safety, policing, and well-being within our city. We can move forward. One of the short-term immediate ways in which this has been done is through the creation of the community safety pilot, the short-term community safety pilot. Now, this is, again, a collection of those major organizations and institutions that come together, that have come together over the summer from July to the end of this month to identify ways to address issues of violence and community safety within our communities, to make sure that there is a public health approach, to ensure that there is a use of best practices on how best to support communities that's not overly enforcement heavy, but truly considers what communities need to be healthy and supported, but also integrating and coordinating our systems so we're not, frankly, wasting resources collectively within the city as it relates to addressing these issues. And finally, ensuring that there's a place-based approach to our strategies for supporting our communities to move forward. Now, that is the short term. On the long term, there is a more integrated safety coordination team that includes those same players. Now, I'm not going to go into the details on that, but what I really want to stress for the understanding of the committee members is that there is an ongoing process of bringing these agencies together to ensure that we are having a coordinated approach that is more human-centered approach, that is also prioritizing the well-being of our communities when it comes to policing, justice, and safety issues. You can move forward. And one of the major achievements, or one of the major ways in which City Council specifically has recognized this, is through the adoption of a 10-year plan called SafeTO. And so City Council officially adopted SafeTO on July 14th. Now, the scope of this presentation certainly wouldn't allow me to get into the details, but at a high level, there are 26 priority actions and 7 strategic goals of that plan. Again, the point is to ensure the committee that there's an understanding and know that there is this opportunity to address, or that this opportunity is being taken by the city to address community safety and well-being issues across the city. We can move forward. Now, as it relates specifically to the Toronto Action Plan to Confront Anti-Black Racism, many of you will likely have seen that there is a community and policing eliminating anti-Black racism team that is called for as a specific action within the action plan. So now I'm speaking to the specific ways in which the CABR unit is engaged in police reform work. And so this is a committee that exists to oversee the implementation of the actions related to policing and justice as articulated in the action plan. So there's a focus on stopping racial profiling and over-policing of Black Torontonians, having more fair, transparent, and accountable policing within our city, and of course, an investment in alternative forms of public safety. And so we've been hearing the conversation within our communities, and so this is part of, this falls in line with that, but of course the action plan predates these calls from some to, for instance, under the language of defund the police. These commitments in the action plan predate that, and so we have been working on that through the action plan. You can move forward. Now, one of the most significant initiatives that now exists for implementing police reforms that the CBR unit is directly connected to is the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel, which is a panel of the Toronto Police Services Board. Now, the ARAP, or Anti-Racism Advisory Panel, ARAP for short, was established in February of 2021, and it has a mandate to move forward on the implementation of 81 recommendations that have been adopted by the Toronto Police Services Board that largely came out of the calls to action that were articulated by communities last summer, as I mentioned, and Interim General Manager Cheryl Blackman had also spoken to. There's been a lot of action where the city has been responsive to those calls. And so not only is this group focused on implementation of those recommendations, but also making sure that the action plan is followed through on, making sure also that there's race-based disaggregated data monitoring and control to make sure communities understand what's happening there. There's also the Andrew Loku inquest recommendations that the ARAP is focused on making sure the Toronto Police Services Board is supporting the service to deliver on. We can move forward to the last slide. There are other inquest recommendations that speak to issues of racism, impacting not just Black communities, but also Indigenous communities and other racialized communities. And so this body, the ARAP, is focused on making sure there's follow through at the board level on that and at the service level as well. There's also a focus on training, and the 81 recommendations that I mentioned are noted there. And finally, there's a strong focus on making sure that the police budget more adequately reflects the values, interests, and needs of all Toronto communities, but especially Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities. And so that concludes my presentation. It is high level. There is a lot of information there, but what my hope is in sharing this is that it will support your conversations in the next item related to the work plan. So I want to just say thank you for the time to share.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Morgan. Are there any questions for Mr. Morgan? Okay, seeing no questions, are there any speakers on this item? Seeing no speakers, I would then move the item. Move receipt of the item. All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. Thank you. All right, so we are now moving to our last and final item, CR 3.6, which is a work plan. We have a presentation from Justine Namara and Maya Yaya. You have the floor, ladies.
Thank you. I believe one of the city clerks will be sharing a presentation for us. Thank you. Awesome. So I just first like to start by thanking Deputy Mayor Thompson for the opportunity to address the committee, and of course Mr. Morgan for providing an overview of how we got here. So the work that the CABR has been doing along with community members. I think it was mentioned earlier on in the agenda and then just now as well. So it is Justine and I's absolute pleasure to present an updated work plan for the CABRAC's consideration to guide our upcoming work for the year. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the members of the CABRAC who contributed to the updated work plan. You know, your amazing ideas and thoughtful queries are a testament to the brilliance on this team, and I'd really just like to highlight that. And now I'll pass it on to Justine for our next slide.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Maya, and good afternoon, committee members. I would like to echo Maya's vote of thanks to Mayor Tory for his exemplary leadership. As we highlight the 4 areas of focus for the CABRAC's work, we would like to share a few general comments. The issues we are addressing at this committee did not emerge overnight. They're a product of centuries and generations of systematic discrimination and anti-Black racism embedded in the policies and practices of our governments and institutions at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. With that said, we could not address all the issues before us and had to make a strategic decision to focus on 4 priority themes with specific areas of focus within each theme to ensure we have a greater impact that will be felt by all Black residents. You will see that we have kept the breadth of issues and opportunities for action that fall outside the work plan priorities in the work plan document as an ongoing commitment to consider and hold space for this depth and range of issues facing our Black communities. Next slide, please, and over to you, Maya.
Thank you, Justine. So as you can see up here on the slide, we have 4 priority themes that have been identified based on the CABRAC members' feedback, which includes employment and entrepreneurship, which the mayor also previously really underlined a little bit earlier in the meeting today. Education, as well as housing and healthcare, and policing and the criminal justice system. So we'll now review how each of these areas will advance one of the 3 program areas of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent, and where we will focus in each thematic area. And I'll pass it back to Justine for the next slide for us to start.
Thank you, Maya. With so much consideration, and as Maya said, and Mayor Tory had highlighted, the first thematic area for action is is employment and entrepreneurship. This falls under the UN International Decade theme on development. Employment and entrepreneurship is expected to be a central area of advocacy with a focus on the Black missing middle. The Black labor force population is overcharacterized by precarious low-wage work, resulting in high levels of poverty among Black residents and communities. These focus areas will aim to serve those populations who identify as young adults, young professionals, and mid-career workers who are underserved by existing policy initiatives and programs that have traditionally been focused on children, youth, and seniors. Our approach will consider populations who are living outside city-defined priority neighborhoods, as this has been identified as a gap. Access, awareness, and targeting of existing opportunities will be another component of this theme. Many in the Black community are not connected to our civic institutions and therefore are further away from the available opportunities. We would like to improve the targeted initiatives such as the Federal Black Entrepreneurship Program, the city's Anchor TO, Black vendor and social procurement, and targeted arts employment initiatives to see maximum impact of these employment and entrepreneurship programs. Next slide, please, and over to you, Maya.
Thanks, Justine. So theme 2 is focused on education and will advance both development and justice as themes of the UN International Decade. So this area will have 3 areas of focus. One is improving and strengthening the links between educational outcomes and access to good employment and income opportunities for Black communities. And second, we've got addressing the issue of high dropout rates of post-secondary students. And in third, working with the province and school boards to see the development and implementation of anti-Black racism curriculum and the collection of race-based data in schools. We believe that this will improve the experience and recognition of anti-Black racism in our education system and empower Black students to engage in curriculum development and the decision-making that ultimately affects them. Over to you, Justine, for the next slide.
Thank you, Maya. The next thematic area of focus is focused on advancing the UN International Decade theme on development through a focus on housing and health. We are very aware that these are distinct issues and could have been priorities on their own, but the Kabrak Committee recognizes the breadth of housing challenges facing Black residents and how these challenges have been one of the central causes of poor health outcomes. In response, therefore, the Kabrak Committee will use a housing-first approach to advance 2 primary goals under this theme. The first goal will be to advocate for a targeted approach to housing supports for Black residents, including the provision of shelters, homelessness supports, supportive housing, transitional housing, social housing, and affordable housing and rent-to-own options. The second goal will be to improve mental and physical health programs and services for populations who have been vulnerable by being underhoused, including seniors and 2S LGBTQ+, as well as Black queer youth. This will also include increased promotion and awareness of the Black Mental Health Week. Next slide, please, and over to you, Maya.
Thank you, Justine. So now, last but not least, the final area for action is policing and the criminal justice system, which will advance theme 3 in the UN International Decade, which is justice. As you heard in the presentation earlier, there are a variety of community crisis supports and community safety initiatives underway at the city. To best target the Kabrak's advice, the city's work will focus on improved outcomes to advance wellness, community safety, and alternatives to policing through providing advice to the Community Crisis Support Service pilot. 2 additional areas of focus include to increase knowledge and understanding of civil and civic rights and access to adequate legal representation for Black immigrants who are at risk of deportation, and to amplify and engage the work of the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent as another mechanism to highlight gaps and barriers in achieving development, recognition, and justice for people of African descent in Canada. Carding in schools was also raised as an issue under this theme. Although it will not be an area of focus, this issue will be considered as part of the work on improved educational outcomes and employment pathways. Back to you, Justine, for our last 2 slides.
Thank you, Maya. Next slide, please. So as mentioned before, there's a breadth of issues and opportunities for action. Additional items that have been identified in the work plan include environmental racism, food security, and disaggregated race-based data collection. The CBR unit is currently advancing these issues through the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism, through initiatives including the Black Food Sovereignty Plan, whose board directorship was recently shared with us all, the Black Mandated Funding Framework, and through the city's Data for Equity strategy. For that reason, these issues can be considered by KABRAC, but will not be areas of focus for KABRAC's work and targets. Next slide, please. Well, that marks the end of our presentation. Maya and I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present, and we look forward to members' comments and questions. Now, we would like to turn it over to Mr. Anthony Morgan to respond to questions raised. Thank you.
The questions for Mr. Morgan? Okay. Your mic is still on. Do you have a question for Mr. Morgan? Okay, go ahead, please. You have 5 minutes.
I don't have any questions.
Oh, I see. Okay, I thought I saw your head indicating you had. Okay, great, no problem. All right, so let me just have a quick run through to see whether or not there are any other hands. Okay, so there are no questions. Anyone to? Miss Anne. Sorry, go ahead. I see your hand now. Go ahead, please, Anne.
Could you put up the 4 areas again, please? Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Oh, we'll get them up in a moment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Just coming up now. My apologies. I had closed the file inadvertently.
Oh, no problem. Take your time. They are, Miss Phil. Oh, it was there a moment ago. There we go. There we are.
So my question is just around a little bit more clarity as to how these 4 specific areas were identified as the top 4 priorities, as opposed to some of the other areas, for example, disaggregated race-based data.
Mr. Morgan?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So there was a process that was initiated almost right after the members of the KABRAC were selected, where you may remember connecting with members of our team and having intimate conversations about what are some of the things that you want to do as it relates to your membership on the KABRAC, and then looking and connecting those interests with the mandate of the committee itself. And then once that was done through those one-on-one conversations, we aggregated that information, and then we looked at, again, the mandate of KABRAC, the interests of the members, and then also looked at other overlapping strategies and initiatives of the City of Toronto, including the commitment to the International Decade for People of African Descent, which is a grounding, guidepost, you might say, or grounding values and principles of the of the work of the CRBRAC. And so it was through that, taking all that information, the interviews, looking at various city strategies, looking at the particular interests of the members, and the specific mandate of the CRBRAC, and then they were distilled into these 4 critical areas in light of, if we're being really honest, the timeline and the horizon that we have in CRBRAC, what could be most effectively achieved in the term of the CRBRAC.
Thank you.
It's me, Molly. I just have a quick question with regards to collaboration at the provincial, federal level, as well as stakeholder engagement with other municipalities, especially those that have a high concentration of Black communities. What is the steps towards that to ensure? Because as you're aware, a lot of these issues, especially housing and housing, a lot of the let's say the groundwork in terms of policy is trickled down from federal to provincial before it reaches municipalities. So, what is the next step as it relates to that?
Well, that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking it. The great thing about the opportunity of the CRBRAC is that you get to guide and direct that. The idea is that the CRBRAC would, of course, come together and say, okay, City of Toronto, City Council, these are the things you recognize you can do. But here are the parts where we need the province's help, and here are the parts where we need the fed's help. And so the CRBRAC thereby recommends that City Council take X or Y steps in engaging with the province or engaging with the federal government to help ensure that the parts of its mandate that are relevant to Black communities is implemented. So there's an opportunity for the CRBRAC to determine just that.
Thank you. Sharice?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for the work. We have a lot of work to do. And I wanted to ask Anthony, there was a passing of carding in schools, and I wasn't sure how that's taken up in this work plan, or it went by so fast that I wasn't sure what the reference was about the carding in schools, as it's a very important issue.
Sure. I think you may be referring to school resource officers within Toronto District School Board, and I believe the Catholic Board as well. So that wouldn't fall within the purview of City Council, of course. The boards of education have their own boards, and they made a decision ultimately to discontinue at the CDSB level what they refer to in short is the SRO program, so that there could be more study and evaluation of whether or not it is actually having an effective impact. So I think ultimately for the interest of the CRBRAC, that issue, there's an opportunity possibly to get an update from the board on what its progress is on doing that research and evaluation. And so these are some of the things that the CRBRAC can come together and think about to learn about what is actually moving forward and how things are changing.
Could I just follow up?
Sure, go ahead, please.
I'm familiar with that, with the whole, having come from the education system, I'm familiar with the SRO, and I lobbied against them continuing and so on. What I was thinking about was the connection between the police reform and the carding of children, because SROs don't necessarily have to be in schools to be carding our kids. So that's what I was wondering about, our work in that area.
So I appreciate that added clarification, and it remains a pressing issue through the, as I shared in the presentation, the CAPE ABR is tasked, so that's a working group that composes of community members and policing officials that are specifically focused on the implementations of actions that come through the action plan. And one of them specifically is related to carding, not just of children and youth, but of all residents of the city. And so that is one of the primary bodies that make sure that we're making advances in that respect. And then again, with the Anti-Racism Advisory Panel of the Toronto Police Services Board, that's another space where there is an opportunity, and that's again a body of the Police Services Board, where there's an opportunity to make presentations, deputation, and speak to that group to ensure that there is a halting of this practice that you're speaking to, regarding of children and youth, and all Torontonians, frankly.
Thank you, and I just want to make a quick witty comment. I just like the pictures.
Can I just ask you to hold for a second? If you're going to comment, I'll get you to comment when it's an opportunity to speak.
Sorry about that. Okay.
So that's fine, unless you have another question, but you'll have an opportunity to, no, that's okay. No need to apologize. You'll have an opportunity to speak, so you can speak, and that will be part of your comments, okay? We're just going through the procedures. I'll come to you in a second, please. Just hold for a second. Let me just check to make sure there are no other members of committee wishing to ask questions, and I'll come back to speaking. So let me just check through the list, and if I don't see you, it's again but a small screen here. I'll ask you to unmute your mic if you have any questions on this presentation of staff. Okay. Looking through my screen, I see no further questioners. So we're going to close the questioning period on this particular item, and we will now go to speakers. So go ahead, please.
Sorry about that before. I just wanted to say that I'm glad to see that in the visuals you have included seniors.
Oh yeah, no problem. There's no need to be sorry. Let's just make sure that we're really clear. This is the third meeting of this group, and everyone's becoming more familiar with respect to the process and procedures. I suspect by the time we get to meeting number four, everybody will be seniored and professional and have this down pat. So not a problem. Our next meeting, we're looking forward to going through that. And as the clerk has pointed out, we're not as sort of formal in as much as we're trying to make sure that we can get the agenda completed and so on. All right. So thank you very much for that comment. Let me just thank the members who have made the presentation. That's Justine and Maya. Thank you very much for that. And members who have contributed to this, and those who obviously may have questions later. And of course, we know that this information is available to all. And as we have alluded to it before, this is a big work plan. I want to thank Mr. Morgan and those who have contributed to the condensing of it, right? Because we really want to focus the effort and energy, because yes, it's a lot of work and a lot of ground to cover. But I think that the staff and the input that has been provided is helpful, and I would think instrumental in terms of going forward for us to really focus a lot of attention. As you pointed out, there's issues relating to the school board and so on and so forth. And while the school board is not within our purview to be able to make decisions on, there are opportunities for us to communicate to them matters that will come up through this group and others of council. There is a working group of council that meets with the school board and ongoing discussions and issues that are raised. So this is very helpful. So with that, I would move receipt of this particular item. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Clerks, I believe we have come to the end of the items that were on the agenda for discussion today. However, I know that there are a number of members of committee that were not here at this particular meeting. So I guess we'll move a motion to excuse the absence of the members who were not present at this meeting. I don't have a list of all the members, so I'm presuming that clerks, you are aware as to
we will display
all
it for
the members that were not here. Pardon me?
The motion is up, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. So, okay, got it. Let me just not really clear. There we go. It's much clearer now. Okay, so that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee excuse the absence of Adam Lake, Justice Betty, Monique Hansen from the September 24th, 2021 meeting of the committee. Thank you very much. So the motion, all those in favor, opposed, that's carried. And motion to, so we have now concluded all the business of the day. So I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn from any member of the committee.
I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
May I just ask who that is? Is that Anne?
It's Anne, yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne, for that. And so all those in favor, opposed, that's carried. Members of the committee and members of staff, presenters, and everyone, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate your contribution in terms of this meeting, which is Confronting Anti-Black Racism and Advisory Committee. Also like to thank members of the public who may have who've been with us for the for this meeting. Thank you so much. I wish everyone well and a great weekend. All the best. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.